Okay, hello everybody. We are here live for our WomenEdTech webinar. I'm just going to ask Biana, can you just switch your camera off, please? Thank you. And if you can mute as well until you're on. And okay. Okay, so this is the WomenEdTech session. Buki, are you going to join us for, you're going to do your slides? Thank you for joining us, everybody. We're very excited to tell you all about WomenEdTech.
Okay, thank you, Ju. So yes, so welcome to the third day of the WomenEd Global Unconference, and what a fantastic weekend, even though it's fairly dreary here in the UK, but this has definitely brightened up many of our experiences and across the world. So just to give you a little bit of a run through about WomenEd, we now are across 19 countries and we've got 30 networks globally. So that is a fantastic reach with over 34,000 followers on Twitter. So as always, this is the thing about tech, isn't it? It never does what you want it to do. Yeah. So a quick thank you to our sponsors, Lift Lessons, who partnered with WordAware, have actually provided for us to use Zoom. So thank you very much, Andrea and Caroline. Hope you're keeping well where you are. So WomenEd, why does it actually exist? It basically is around to support existing and aspiring women leaders in education. And it's not just that, there are more different aspects we're actually covering. But we look at things from a strategic viewpoint, looking at how we can actually support the different regions, and actually looking at how we can actually support different countries around the world so that women leaders actually feel supported. Okay, so getting started, please make sure that you include your Twitter name, your Twitter handle in your video image. We are actually recording the session, so if there are any parts that you missed for whatever reason, you could watch it later on via our YouTube. Please make sure that you mute your microphones and turn off your videos. And also include, if you're going to make any comments, by all means, please do, particularly in the Zoom chat. Please make sure that you include your Twitter name and your name and your Twitter handle. So if you want to contribute and share your ideas more widely than that, please make sure that you use www.menti.com and use the code that you can actually see on the screen. Can we all clearly see that? So it's 22, 35 and 6. And basically, if you're not familiar with Menti, it creates a Wordle of all the different responses so that we can then take a screenshot and share that across the social media platforms. Please, please, please make sure that you actually participate. So the chats are great. If there are any questions you want to ask during a session, discussions, or panel discussions you actually see, please use the Q&A aspect you see, and make sure that the chats actually go to the panelists and the attendees so that everyone actually gets to see them. And by all means, use Twitter, okay? Use the hashtag WomenEd, WomenEd Unconference, so that all the different tweets can actually be captured in that way. So, as I said, our mission is to empower more women in education to have choice in their progress and journey. And this image basically shows that generally the career progression of men within education is quite linear. Okay, they go from one rung to another. But women, it can actually be not so straightforward. So you may be progressing and you may find that you have to detour, for example, due to changes in your personal circumstance. But that's okay. And we're actually here to support that. We have got our 8 C's, so it's about ensuring that whatever we do chimes in with our vision in this regard. So clarity, communication, connection, confidence, collaboration, community, challenge and change. And all the online as well as in-face initiatives we actually undertake and training links to these 8 C's. Now, this year, we've actually got 4 campaigns: increasing representation in leadership roles, increased diversity and representation of women in leadership roles. We're an advocate for flexible working approaches, and we're going to be hearing about that from Emma Turner later on this morning, and also exploring how we could actually reduce the gender pay gap. We have 2 books. So the first book, Being 10% Braver, was published about 18 months ago approximately. We've got a second book, Being 10% Braver, which is going to be published in December of 2020, just in time for Christmas. So that would be a great treat there. And if you are looking to contact Women Ed after this event, there are a number of different ways you can actually do that. We've got a Twitter account, Facebook, Instagram, you can email. So there are lots of details, and we will share these details again at the end of the session. So please think about how we're going to be 10% braver. What difference will this session actually make in what you do as an educator? Now, the Menti code, I can see the correct code here now. Please make sure that you click onto, you Google www.menti.com and use the code 92 22 35 and 6. I'm going to pause for about 10 seconds so you can note the website and also the correct code before I introduce us to WomenEdTech. Okay, so WomenEdTech. Those of you that joined the launch that took place Zoom in July of 2020 will have heard of WomenEdTech before and have met 6 of us, fantastic, diverse leaders in different ways with technology. I want to just very quickly share our aims. So WomenEdTech actually is part of Women Ed, but we want to actually to raise a profile of women within educational technology. Not everyone strives to be a leader, whether it be a head teacher or leader of an organisation, but we want to make sure that we actually support that. So, in short, with this aim, we want to make sure we provide a platform that helps current and future leaders realise their potential so they can actually stand on the shoulders of giants. There have been many women who've contributed in a variety of ways in education and technology, and it's not always known. So we want to make sure that we provide a platform so that we can lead the way and actually have a lasting legacy in that regard. And lastly, we want to create an empowered community on a local, national and global level so that we can actually increase the capacity of women through technology, but make sure that it is actually inclusive, visible, and that we actually do have impact. So my name is Buki Yusuf. I should have introduced myself. I always forget this at the start. And I've been involved in EdTech for about 6 to 7 years in a variety of ways, senior leader with regards to EdTech. And I'm an EdTech advocate. So I look at supporting schools and organisations from a strategic viewpoint all the way down to what can actually take place within the classroom. I'm also the co-chair of the DFE Educational Leadership Group. So we actually make decisions that enable us to bring the government's EdTech vision that was launched in April 2019 to life. And I'll quickly hand over to Jules, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, so I'm Jules Dorby. So I am part of Women Ed, and as Buki is, and then also WomenEdTech. We were very excited to start WomenEdTech, and particularly for me, so I work in special needs and inclusion, and I got very interested in tech through that route. So assistive technology, so speech to tech, text to speech, those sorts of things. I started doing a course on that, and it's sort of rollerblade really. So now in school I'm doing a digital platform for our school to ensure that we have assistive technology, which includes just word processing, I might add, as well as some more sophisticated stuff like eye gaze and iPads, communication boards. So that's really how I got into tech and met Buki as well as through Women Ed.
Okay, thank you so much, Jules. Oops, go back. Okay, so in the middle, on top layer, is Claire Erasmus. Now, she's the head of digital technology and communications in her secondary establishment. And her school have also been shortlisted for the best use of technology from the TES Awards. And later on this month, we'll be able to find out about how well they've actually done with that. So it's great to hear that through the innovative use of technology, that their efforts are actually being noticed. Kirsty Grundy, she has been involved with educational technology for over 15 years. She is a primary director of Shirelands Collegiate Academy Trust, and she's also basically the primary head teacher of Shirelands Technology Primary School, and just a strong advocate for technology. Dr. Neelam Parla has also been involved in technology for over 10 years. She is the Director of Educational Technology, Digital Learning and Innovation for a multi-academy trust within the UK. She has also written a digital parenting book which deals with the technological challenges that children can actually face and how parents can actually support that. And last but not least is Ranjit Kaur. She has a background in IT and computing, and she is also a book publisher and illustrator. And she centers around educating children around the Sikh religion. So that's just a quick whistle-stop tour for our Women EdTech network leaders. If you want to find out more about them, you've got their Twitter handles so you can actually see what they are involved with. So before we hand over to our presenters, please make sure that you contribute your comments in the chat channel and make sure that it's actually listed to the panelists and attendees. If you've got any particular questions, use the Q&A panel and we will make sure that each of your questions are actually answered during the presentation. Okay, thank you, and handing back to you.
Thank you. So we've got some Julia Skinner and Penny Rabija to join us, Buki, to have a quick chat before we hand over to Elaine, who's going to do a presentation on hybrid learning. And the question is to discuss, well, the question is about stereotyping. So why is stereotyping in tech even worse, or is it even worse than any other sort of leadership positions? Julia, I was wondering maybe if you'd like to start us off, because I know you're quite techie, aren't you?
Well, I am, and you see, that's the problem. You see how I hesitated there, and I'm a woman. I hesitated because it's tech. So in my head, that's a man's world. And many people watching may know of my 100-word challenge, which is an online writing project. And it is tech. You have to have the tech in order to take part in it. And some schools in Ireland told me that through lockdown, the 100-word challenge was the only consistent thing in their lives. So it clearly is very important to people. But I started off feeling very nervous that I was moving into a man's world. And when it came to conferences, of which there were many 5 or so years ago, I always had to elbow my way in. I was never invited. They were always happy for me to be there, but I had to invite myself and elbow my way in. So I think there is this big problem that women aren't expected to be techie. And we sometimes go along with that and don't push ourselves forward.
Thank you, Julia. And Penny, you're also part of Lifter, which is a tech company. Tell us about how the stereotypes in your company. Are there any? Have you bucked the trend?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've got quite a background in working in EdTech anyway, because I was one of the founding directors of the Key for School Leaders, and that's all about, you know, having a website, and we were sort of the ones who kind of conceptualized that, and the senior leadership team there was, when I was there, was all women, so that's interesting. I think also being in the EdTech world, it's not just about being technical, it's about understanding how the people using the technology are going to receive it, are going to interact with it, and are going to use it. So I think there are some advantages in being a woman, in that you might be closer to understanding how technology can help and how technology can hinder, especially if you use any kind of tech in running the home, for example. I know that having a shared calendar with my partner really, really helps any kind of children being left weeping at after school club and things like that. But I think at Lifter we have a good balance of men and women, and we have a good balance of men and women across the kind of caring roles and the very techie roles. So quite a few of our customer facing roles are male, and that requires a lot of empathy and being able to understand people's experience. And then we spent a long time looking for a developer to help us on the back end of the website. And we were delighted that we found a very rare female developer. So I think for us, it's really important to try to buck those stereotypes and trends and to try to look beyond and see what people bring with them and how those can be used.
Thank you. Buki, have you experienced any type of challenges with regards to stereotyping in tech? I certainly have found that I've often been looked over, a bit like Julia said, around, especially if I'm sitting next to a man, they'll often imagine they're the person that's the expert rather than me. Has anybody else experienced that?
Well, when I first was actually involved in, I suppose, EdTech leadership within my school, trying to roll out the devices to be used across the whole of a school for students aged 11 to 19. We had a lot of meetings with the IT providers. And what was quite interesting was almost how, I wouldn't say, it was almost how exclusive the language was. So they spoke tech. Now, I didn't speak tech, but I don't need to know about tech. What I needed to know is how could the IT framework support the teaching and learning that we're trying to implement, and here and now, but also 5 years down the line. So we often pull them up about the fact that are you doing this because you just think we won't understand, or you're just trying to show that you know more than we did? In the end, they actually did come around to our way of thinking and actually say, okay, we understand about what you need, and they were more, I suppose, more accommodating. But that was something that I found quite interesting. With regards, to be honest, I've always been, I was like a tomboy younger, so whether it was on trend or not, I just engage with the conversations. But I do recognize in a lot of arenas that I am a rarity for a variety of reasons. So that's basically what I've experienced.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in? Another area of lack of diversity is age. And with COVID and going to a pub and all the apps and everything that the pubs have, there is this assumption that as soon as Nick and I walk in, we are going to have problems with the app. And, a young man actually said to me a little while ago, if you're not techie, then don't worry about the app. And I said, I've got the app, but actually your app doesn't work. And it's all but there is a problem not only for gender but also for age, and for me, I bucked the trend twice.
Yeah, that's why I was so glad you agreed to join us to talk about that, because as you say, that sort of idea of you were one of the first people I met on Twitter, and so you seemed completely techie and you were doing your 100 words. So you were right, you were there from the start. So you're a bit of a trendsetter as well, Julia. So so I completely agree. Penny, you wanted to say something.
I just wanted to relate to something that was put in the chat here about working at a boys' school, and when something doesn't work, the boys leap in to sort it out. And I think one of the good things that we've implemented at Lifter is a sort of quite involved process around innovation and around working together as a group to solve problems. So we've adopted the mindset of how might we. Because I think what often happens is often the kind of male techie person will go, all right, I've sorted it, it's done. And then you kind of go, well, what did you do? And they're like, you don't need to worry about that. You know, like you were saying, Bookie, about the techie language, or they start talking about, you know, the AP and the this and the token, and you're just kind of like, but what did you do? So I think as an organization, it's about trying to work out, you know, how do we make it inclusive so that people who are super techie don't need to waste their time trying to translate everything into non-techie language, but also that they don't just race ahead and shove in some kind of solution that technically works, but the people who are more in tune with the end users and the experience don't get upset that, you know, this isn't a nice experience for the people on the receiving end. So we always start with the question of how might we, and then everybody gets a chance to say, this is what we could do this way, and other people can say, well, just representing my client group, I think this, that, and the other. And the other thing is about having like service level agreements with each other. So, you know, how do I serve best the tech team in my role so that I'm not, you know, making agreements with groups of schools that just aren't workable, and how does the tech team keep to their service level agreement with my team? So I think it is about kind of maybe breaking those stereotypes in terms of quick fixes and who's quick and who's slow, who's emotive, who's not, and thinking about a team culture around how might we do this.
I really like that idea of the team as well, and I think I always come back to the idea, if you've got a diverse team, then you're going to always have better solutions, aren't you, and be a better, more productive team for that. And I think that particularly is something the tech world can learn, I think, to have a mixture of people within them. Thank you. It's been a really short session, I know, and we've only got till 10, and we've got Elaine waiting in the background to give us a wonderful presentation on her work in a school. But I really thank you, Julia and Penny particularly, for coming in at last minute, because we had an illness on from somebody, and I hope that person gets well soon. And thank you for joining us. Should we have a last quick comment from anybody about stereotyping? So I'm going to say, for me, is just a bit like Julia said, you've got to fight through it, really. so mine's fight through it.
Agree with that. And remember, you've got skills that the end users do need.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would say, just, it's okay, you know, it's great to have diversity, but it's not great if you've got diverse voices around the table and there's no time for all of them to be heard. So give it time and allow people to discuss in the ways that they find comfortable.
Very good point, thank you. Bookie, I'm going to ask you for the last word for you, and then you can hand over to Elaine.
If you feel that you've actually got skills, or you can actually help with regards to EdTech solutions, invite yourself to the table, find a way.
Thank you. Elaine Hayes, the wonderful, I just want to say about Elaine while she's sharing her screen that she's been the most devoted attendee of Women EdTech, but it's the first time, isn't it, Elaine, you presented, so thank you for volunteering to, and we're really looking forward to it. Over to you.
So you can see my screen okay? Yep. So my name's Elaine Hayes. I'm going to do a little bit on hybrid learning. The reflections from lockdown and how we move forward with it. So I'm an Irish PE and maths teacher from Cork in Ireland. I moved to London in 2012. So one of the things, if anybody who knows me, is I love multi-screens. So this was my lockdown experience. I managed to be in more than one place at a time. So this was year 10 science lessons that were online. And we were able to monitor them and help our staff out in making sure that they were comfortable delivering these live lessons. I also volunteer quite a bit at different sporting events. So these are two pictures, one from European Championships and one from the Athletics World Championships. So that's one of my main interests. This year, I became a Microsoft Innovator Educator Expert for the first time ever. And it's actually down to this whole journey to becoming an MIEE started with a tweet from Jules, which is here from 2018. So this tweet went out and I jumped in, of course, and said, yes, of course, let's go for it. And at that stage, I was looking for opportunities to learn more. So I started doing all the courses on the Microsoft Educator Center. And then as it happens, I was starting to look for a new challenge in my professional life, looking for possibly going to a new school and looking for a kind of new area to explore. It just so happened that the school I ended up at had no digital learning solutions in place yet, which gave me a blank canvas and a very, very supportive head teacher who said, right, let's do it. If we have to find workarounds, we'll find workarounds, and we'll start from there. So starting out with that, in February 2019, we ran our first session on Microsoft Teams with our staff. And the two main bits of learning from that we took. That session was 15 minutes of me talking through what Teams was, how to use it. And the very first thing I taught people was how to move a file in. So just drag from one area, drop into another, which was something that a lot of our staff could do anyway in terms of files. But that session was 15 minutes of me and 40 minutes of staff playing with it, having a go. We created these sandbox teams where staff could just have a go at it. If they got it wrong, they got it wrong. We could always delete it afterwards. So the first lesson I said is about giving time. You have to give time to staff to let them play with it. Set up the opportunities where they can just go at it. And the second thing was we identified a why. For us, our trust policy is that students don't have email, which created issues when we started out with Key Stage 4, where they were trying to submit coursework, USB sticks wouldn't work, go missing. So Teams was an ideal solution for this. And we also packaged it around the area of, right, we'll share revision materials as well this way, which saves budgets in terms of photocopying. And instead of students carrying around reams of paper, we could do it digitally, and found that solution. Roll on 13 months, and this wonderful headline ended up coming out at the start of March. That week in March, I worked extremely hard to get ourselves ready for this. I accidentally, and I do honestly mean accidentally with this, ended up pretty much leading. So because I'd set it all up, I went, right, I'll get it all set up. I drafted our strategy. I drafted the letters to go to staff, the letters to go to parents, they were all used by SLT because it was a sensible solution. Now, it actually went against suggestions that came down from our trust, because I didn't look at this as a short-term solution. It had to be long-term. There's no point in putting this huge effort in when it's just going to work for, the 6 months that we're in lockdown. And the way that we set it up was that we had our individual classes, so we had our students in there. Now, we didn't have this integrated with Sims. So for anybody who knows about Microsoft Teams, that meant we had to add in our students individually. We also had some contingencies put in place where we had all of SLT and the heads of department on every class team that was relevant to them. So if staff got sick, we had these contingencies in place. So with this and the very first slide that I shared was the headline that came out on Thursday about schools now having to offer this online learning. And this is one of my biggest tips in terms of this. Do your best until you know better, and then when you do know better, you can do better. So different schools are in different situations. We've had schools where they were just providing booklet learning for during lockdown, which because of situations they're in. School leaders know their area the best. School leaders know their cohort of students the best. So then they have to be the ones to come up with the solutions. And I'm going to share some ideas around this. But it has to be driven by the people in front of you, the end users. There's no point in your staff offering live lessons if your students can't access them. So three levels that I've kind of come up with from going towards this hybrid learning idea. And I call it a COVID learning offer, where if we have students off isolating. So initially there was providing booklets that students can complete independently. The second one was all about providing short, kind of pre-recorded instructional videos. And then the third one was about providing these live lessons in this hybrid model. This hybrid model means that as you're teaching in lesson, you have some students who are at home attending the lesson virtually, you have some students who are attending in school. And we've had to do this in our school. And it was surprisingly, staff just rose to the challenge. We enabled our staff by giving them time at the very, very start of this whole process during lockdown to play with Teams, to get comfortable. We had this whole idea of practice where we had these sandbox teams where faculties were meeting on a weekly basis and they could practice things with each other, which made a huge, huge difference. So I want to talk about the second and third one really. The second one, about pre-recorded videos. So there's loads of different pieces of software. There's Screencastify, there's Loom. You can do it within PowerPoint itself with the little screen recording. And one of the things that I looked at, we were pre-recording our assemblies and putting them live in our YouTube feed. And one of the things that were very, very obvious was the students weren't engaging with the whole video. Now, these videos were between 10 and 12 minutes long. I did a little bit of research, and the research I found was that it's 6 minutes is the optimum time for this video. And this is coming from a bank of research done in 2014 on these massive online open courses that you see. So like Coursera, FutureLearn, edX, that are all these courses that you can do for free that has multiple users. And they found that after 6 minutes, student engagement kind of diminishes, where the attention span is now gone. So the advice I gave to our staff was, right, if you're giving that instructional video, try and get it into 6 minutes, and then you'll get that message across to our students. The instructional videos that I did for staff, exactly the same, kept them short, sweet, so that people were able to really engage with them and then had time to go and practice. This is kind of the one that government seems to be wanting us to do more and more, this hybrid lesson. And it is difficult. I've done it myself. We've had staff do it. We've had issues with tech. We've had a fantastic pastoral team where they've helped out where they can. So we've added our pastoral team year heads into lessons so that if there's issues where students can't access it, we have a help desk system where students can type in, I'm on it. Our SLT link for IT is on it. The heads of year are on it. We've got a couple of champions who are also on it as well. And that makes a huge difference when there's a group of people that can then enable our students to be able to learn. So with the experience that we've had some staff that have recorded short videos, which I've done in my maths lessons. I've had staff where they've recorded the entire 40 minutes. And when that headline went out on Thursday, there was a huge amount of debate and discussion on Twitter. I don't want parents to be inside my classroom. The nervousness around this whole idea of hybrid learning. The first thing that I would look at is establishing your routine to start this. So what are you going to do in terms of your classroom? So it's come in, is it do the register? Is that when you set up your Teams or whatever your offer is, be it Zoom or Google Classroom? Establish your routine. Practice. And this is coming from, our school is very heavy on the Teach Like a Champion routines and ideas, but you need to practice it. There's no point in going into a classroom, right, okay, I'll do this now. Now, the thing with this is, by practicing it in your faculties, with other members of staff, you get comfortable in establishing this routine and habit. The next one is identify what you want to share in a lesson. So when I looked back at some of our staff and what they did, actually in my own year 11 group. So I was teaching, I have a middle set year 11 class. I was teaching them, and I did a short little video. The students, I left the microphone on. So the students weren't able to see into the classroom, but the microphone was on. And the student actually asked me, the ones that are at home, said, can you please turn it off? It's distracting. But I identified the bit that I wanted to share. I wanted to share the instructional part, the bit that I knew that would help them be successful in the tasks that they needed to do. And after that, I muted the mic. I still had a routine then of going back and forward. So, I check with the students in the classroom, check with the students online. And any time that when we went back into kind of discussion and looking at correcting some of the work, made sure that I repeated what was said in the classroom so that those at home could hear it. And any of the comments that came from at home, I spoke those out loud. Having the chat box up didn't really work because the students are like, oh, can you say hi? And that ends up, getting off task and off what we want to do. The last idea is that how are the students going to share their work? So is it a case that they're going to upload it? How are they going to upload it? Do we know they can upload it? For us, we're using a combination of teams in OneNote. We're not actually collecting in student work for the vast majority of lessons. We're asking students to upload it. And we've had issues. We've had adaptations that we've had to use. But it's getting those routines. And one of the biggest tips, the things that I always say to staff, and I've got some staff who are complete tech phobic. I've had staff members come to me and say, well, actually, do you know what? Because I practiced it, yeah, I'm happy doing it. I'm happy to try it. And that's kind of linking into the 10% braver. Have a go at it. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong. But if you do it within a practice idea, then if it goes wrong, it doesn't really matter. But being that little bit braver and having a go at it, practicing the routine, getting that routine in place, because this looks like it's going to be with us for a long while yet, and ensuring that all our students are learning at the same time. And that's it from me. In terms of my Twitter handle is on my name. I'm happy if you want to get in contact me through Twitter. I've got some notes on that on Teams that I'm very, very happy to share for anybody who's struggling with Teams, but just please get in contact. Thank you, Jules.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Elaine. That was fantastic. I forgot I was hosting them because I was thinking about all the things I could do at school from that. So that was brilliant. Thank you so much, and thank you for doing such a brilliant first presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to try and go straight to Michelle's. And sorry, we will probably run out of time to answer questions, but we will have another session, I think, won't we, Buki? And we are hoping to have an event in November that will be just WomenEdTech on Zoom. So lots of people, if you want to either come to that or if you'd like to present, then do let Buki and I know, because we're really excited about a WomenEdTech event. Over to you, Michelle.
Okay, thank you, Jules. So just to explain, Michelle is with us today, but what she's decided to do is actually share her presentation via PowerPoint. So she's included the audio, and I will start that from my end right now.
Hello, can anyone hear me?
Hi, Michelle.
Right, okay, so I didn't want to actually show my face because I don't have a background that's suitable. So I did actually send audio and it's not working. So if you want to start it again, I can talk it through.
Oh, okay. I didn't realise that, okay. All right, Michelle. Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you for inviting me on to Women Ed this morning. Today I'm going to be talking about 10 EdTech tips for NQTs and early career teachers. And my name's Michelle Grant. So I came to education in 2011. Previous to that, I had worked in community media. So I'm a career changer, and I had my kids first and then decided to change career when my youngest started reception. So since then I've been a TA, a HL TA, and now I'm a teacher in my second year. So my first tip is the free resource for educators called Canva. This is great because you can design anything, and I've used it in my classroom for creating knowledge organisers, and you can use it for anything. So I suggest you sign up. It's free for anyone with an education account. My second tip is it's Twitter, of course, but it's not just Twitter. It's actually adding bookmarks to Twitter. Now, this is something that I found out just this year, and I've been on Twitter for years and years, It's when you see something fantastic, you can add it to your bookmark by using the share button. And then when you click on that bookmark icon, it just puts everything in an organized list. Previous to that, I've been emailing myself, and it's just something to keep organized, all of those fantastic tips and tweets that you see and you want to come back to. My third tip is using Class Dojo. Now, Class Dojo is a free online school communication platform, and it's great for sharing work and behaviour management. During lockdown, we used it all the time to communicate with families. And since we've been back in September, I've been using it for our show and tell sessions. So children take a photograph of something that's special to them, and then they stand up in front of their class and present it. It's so fantastic for speech and language. And the kids really enjoy it too. So my fourth tip is the website Padlet. Padlet is like a sticky board, an online sticky board that people can post to, and you can post to as well. During lockdown, I use this for the children to showcase their home learning, and it was a really great way for them to keep in contact with me, to tell me what they were doing. And also we used it for a weekly chat, so the kids would come on every week and they would chat to each other and chat to me. So it was great to have those connections and keep those relationships going, which was so important when we were not in school. My fifth tip is View Pure. Now, this is a great website for decluttering video that you want to show in your classroom. I use it all the time for YouTube clips because it just takes out all the adverts and all the pop-ups. So you put your URL in the Purify box, press Purify, and it just gives you a pure video in a whitish screen, which is great for none of those distractions that you sometimes get. My sixth tip is Google Online Tools. Now, I discovered this purely by accident. I was looking for a coin flip, and if you search for something like that and scroll down, there is a load of tools on the drop-down menu, and there's lots of really cool things like a spinner and a roll the dice, and the calculator is there, and it's just little things that you can use in your general teaching. That's a nice EdTech tip, and it's a good thing, and the kids love to see it as well. My seventh tip is the snippings tool. Now, that may seem totally obvious to most, but I'm a Mac user at home, and I usually use the Command Shift or 3 or Command Shift and 4 to copy my screen. I discovered this again this year, that there is an actual app called the snipping tool, where you can take a selection of your screen, copy it and paste it into other applications like PowerPoint and Active Inspire. I just wish I'd known this when I first started teaching. That's why I've added it. My eighth tool is Kahoot. Great, it's a great online quiz app that you can create yourself for anything that you're teaching. Again, the kids love this because they can get involved if they've got access to iPads or any kind of mobile technology. In my school, we are tech poor, I should say, so we just use it on the interactive whiteboard as a whole class activity. So there's lots of ways that you can be flexible with this. You can set homework tasks and all sorts, but it's just a great tool and the kids love it. My ninth tip is Epic Books. Epic Books gives your class access to 40,000 ebooks for free. Educators can sign up for a free account, you can set up a classroom, and you can also track your readers. This was an invaluable app during lockdown. My class read so many books and it didn't cost the parents anything. So I suggest you sign up for this because it's free, and it's a great way to give children access to literature. And then my last tip is where to find more EdTech tips. Of course, sign up, be part of WomenEdTech, be part of the EdTech hashtag on Twitter, and for free sources like this one, which is on my screen, the periodic table of iPad apps, check out ictevangelist.com. Mark Anderson is a great resource, and he'll be able to help you. And if you've got time for inset day time, he's great to come and do that as well. So there's loads of stuff on Twitter. It's one of the greatest resources for anyone who's interested in EdTech. So this was my tips for today, and it was just basically stuff that I've used in my classroom that's worked. I'm an early career teacher, and it just was stuff that I'd wish I'd known about straight from the start. So I just wanted to share it with you all, and I hope you find it helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Michelle. And apologies about the sound not working. It was brilliant.
Oh, you'd have never known. That was brilliant. Thanks, Michelle.
Oh, thank you.
I was trying to scrabble those top tips, so I'll have to get those off you.
Well, I'm quite happy to share the presentation if it's stuff that people would like to go back and have a look at.
Brilliant.
And then you'll get to hear my wonderful voice as well.
Yeah. That's brilliant. All right then, thank you.
Thank you.
We are running over time. We were panicking that we didn't have enough to say, and of course, Bookie and I have always got plenty to say. So, and our friends. So, thank you very much, everybody at WomenEdTech. Thank you for joining us, Bookie. Thank you so much. You're always amazing, and those headsets are brilliant. I'm going to now bring in some of the GSLs, as now they're called, from Kezia's name, which is our Global Strategic Leaders, before we hand over to Emma. So thank you very much, all our participants, and Bookie especially. Thank you. Hello, team.
Hello, everybody.
Morning. It's Sunday.
Morning.
Is it? It is.
Is it Sunday in Canada?
It's not morning for Lisa.
Barely.
It is very early for Lisa, isn't it?
That was an awesome session just now, Jules. Brilliant.
Yeah, wasn't it great? I was trying to, I kept forgetting that I was supposed to be sort of hosting it because it was so interesting for my teaching. I was like, oh, that's such a good idea. So I'm going to have to go back and watch those again, I think. So yeah, we've got a great day ahead of us.
It's a bit sad, isn't it, that it's our last session. It feels really weird that it's kind of it's almost over.
I know. But it's been amazing, hasn't it?
Yes, it has, and thank you to everybody who has participated.
Yeah,
Hasn't it gone quickly though? You think a whole weekend and it's just flew past.
Yeah, it has, and we've had brilliant presentations, and everybody's been amazing, and you know, with Julia and Penny, quick thank you to them because they came in very quickly because we had an illness, so we were really chuffed about that. Yeah, so and we've got Emma Tanner next, I believe.
Wowza.
Yeah, and Emma, as this new term that Jill Berry has joined in on now, Emma is going naked.
Well, sort of. So thank you so much for having me, first of all. It's an absolute joy to even be part of this. I'm just so overwhelmed to be a part of the day with so many fantastic leaders, educators. So thank you so much. I am going naked, so to speak, but I have got a blanket to cover my, to cover my tech modesty, so to speak. There is a method in the madness of having this blanket here. This blanket is a patchwork blanket that I did not make. I'm not crafty. That a lovely lady made for me on the birth of my third child. And he still sleeps with it now, but it kind of illustrates everything I wanted to talk about flexible working. There is so much work still to do around the narrative of flexible working, because still, I mean, I've mentioned I've got 3 children. I'm an advocate for flexible working. So many people automatically think, oh, you're a part-time worker or you're a flexible worker because you've got children. So that's the first kind of assumption people jump to, really. Well, actually, I've been a flexible worker in education since well before I had the children. I've been working flexibly in education since 2004. And each time I've worked in lots of different roles. It's given me so many different opportunities, different sort of takes on the sector, and so many opportunities to do things differently. Now, I've worked part-time as a teacher, as a class teacher, I've been a co-head for 8 years, during which time I had my children. I work part-time at the moment, 1 day a week, for a multi-academy trust doing their research and CPD lead work across the trust. And I'm also, very recently, I've become the co-chair of governors at my children's school, which incidentally I was asked to do as a full-time role, and I kind of went, I'd really like to do it, but I haven't really got capacity at the moment. Have you ever thought about co-chairship? And so actually that's now come to fruition as well. And I know I'm lucky. I know I'm really lucky because I've never met any resistance to working flexibly, but I kind of think that's because a lot of the time I went in with a solution. I went in with saying, do you know what? I'd really like to work in this way, and I've thought about these things, and I think it could work if we did this. And as Julia Skinner was saying, I kind of invited myself into the flexible working roles. So my first tip for working flexibly would be invite the conversation. As I've worked for so many years flexibly in education, I couldn't possibly have foreseen that there was actually so much more flex within working flexibly. Now, 1 day a week might sound idyllic for some people, it might sound horrendous. I must admit, on days when the children are being challenging, I would rather work a lot more. But there is the potential, if you do work flexibly, to feel out of the loop. So there's a lot of work that organisations, individual organisations, need to do to ensure their flexible workers feel part of something bigger. My immediate line managers are amazing at this. They are so innovative, so agile, so responsive, so caring to the needs of my particular role. I haven't ever felt alone. I've only ever felt supported. They are absolutely brilliant. And there are so many things that other organisations could learn from the way that they work. Now, because I've been flexing home and work, it's given me a lot more time, a lot more wriggle room to pursue other interests, to pursue other things, because I'm not stretched to breaking point. And that's a really important point for working flexibly. So many people think it's balancing one job of work as much as you can possibly cram in, like as close to full time as you can possibly get it, and then home, and everything becomes frayed and stretched and kind of overwhelming in a way. But what my work setup has done, and what I would advocate anybody would do, is buy yourself some wriggle room within a flexible working model. Because the way that I've worked now has meant that I've started to do all sorts of new things. I write for the TES, I've written 2 books, I speak at events, I've taken on additional projects, which has meant that actually not only have I developed, but my trust that I work for part-time gets all that incidental learning around the things that I've been involved in that I then bring to their organisation. And what organisations need to recognise is that actually working flexibly in this kind of patchwork of this bit, that bit, that bit, that bit, enhances and develops every single role that you work in, because you're doing so many different things. You're not just balancing one job of work and then one role at home. Another thing that why flexible working has so much further to go is because people are still struggling with the basics, and they're also trying to systemize flexibility, because people are struggling with things like payments, timetabling, contracts. That stifles the potential creativity of a flexible working setup. And what you end up with is what I call rigid flexibility. This is how we do flexible working here. These are our approaches. We've done the paperwork, we've got the systems in place. If you want to work flexibly, you work in this way. Well, actually, systemized flexibility, rigid flexibility, isn't flexible working at all. It's a rigid, boxed off way of saying, if you don't want to do full-time or you don't want to do traditional, you do it this way. That's not true flexibility. It's not a bespoke approach. And that's what true flexible working is. It's a bespoke, crafted, handmade approach to each individual set of circumstances. Now, flexible working as well isn't about cramming every single second of your life full of work and full of home. It's about crafting opportunity. Opportunity for you to develop, for you to think, for you to grow. And if you're kind of full to the brim with work and home, there's not time to flourish, grow and develop. So it's about recognizing that if we work flexibly, that opens doors, it makes connections, it widens networks, it builds confidence as well. Because I know when I've worked in a single flexible working job, single role at home, when one of those things is going particularly badly, it really can knock your confidence. I do so many things now that there's always going to be one of them that's going well and one of them that's maybe not going as well, but that gives you wonderful perspective. Flexible working gives you great perspective on your efficiency, your ability, your adaptability. It's a huge kind of personal morale booster. So what I would really like to do is to totally shift the narrative around flexible working, push it even further. And for a start, stop calling it flexible working. It's not. This is about living, flexible living, living flexibly, weaving, crafting that blend between how you want to live and how you want to work. Because actually your work should enhance your life. You shouldn't be living just to go to work. So actually let's forget flexible working and talk about flexible living, and then think about how we can create new opportunities to develop that flexible living approach, and not to have this precariously filled to the brim kind of balance, potentially tipping set of scales between work and home. So what I would advocate is that people start to think less about rigid flexibility, more about patchwork flexibility. So we're not having a blanket approach to this is what flexible working is, this is what it looks like. And I think one of the beautiful things about the pandemic is it has shown that actually there's nothing in our system, in our infrastructure that cannot be flipped, that cannot be changed. Don't get me wrong, the working from home that we did during a pandemic is not flexible working, could not be further from flexible working. But what it has shown is that nothing has to stay the same, and that flexible working is possible, it's doable, and it may well be the answer to so many of the retention, recruitment issues that we have in school. So I would say, if you're thinking about flexible working, avoid the blanket, embrace the patchwork. Stop thinking about flexible working, start thinking about flexible living, and create your own bespoke patchwork approach to developing your career, yourself, and your life. And that's me done.
Oh, thank you, Emma. I love flexible living. I'm going to start saying flexible living. That's brilliant. Dr. Deborah Alfie has joined us right at the right time. So I'm just going to let you two transition together. Say hello and goodbye, like a double act.
Hello, Deb. We must stop meeting like this.
We must stop meeting like this, Emma. So I am going to follow on there seamlessly on all of Emma's themes and talk about what that flexible living can look like and what we can embrace when we follow on from it. But I'm not going naked. Maybe I will go naked next time. So thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Jill, for the going naked option, but I've got some slides. Okay,
Thanks,
morning
Deb.
everybody. I think, so I took so much out of yesterday's sessions. I thought we did some really great sessions. And I think the contextualization that everybody's doing at the start of their sessions, just to put into context who they are and where they come from and the perspectives they bring to things, is really useful. And I think inadvertently what people are talking about here is their her stories. You know, her stories is a very well-established name in feminist literature. History comes from the men telling stories, and traditionally women are the ones who tell them verbally, bedtime stories, all of that. So I'm going to say a little bit about my own her story and how I got here so that you understand the context in which I'm speaking. But I'm often put towards the end of these sessions because I do what Hannah Wilson described as a call to arms. And I've never thought of myself as delivering anything that was a call to arms, you know, sort of small c conservative in many ways, you know, mum of three, like to send everybody in clean uniform in the morning and everything. And so it always surprises me, but I think I come from a social science background. And in coming from a social science background, a lot of the politics, a lot of the sociology, a lot of the economics that we're surrounded by when we talk about things from a feminist perspective are kind of bread and butter, and they're part of my own history. So I've just put something up here. I'm not particularly going to talk through it, but I've been using this with my trainees this year, my trainee teachers. And when you talk about a biographical trajectory, it's really useful for them to have a think about, and people, you know, mid-career and at different points in their career, to have a think about where you've come from and where you're going to, you know, the different things in which you do and which you've done. So for example, I was ill as a teenager, I had a cancerous lump removed, didn't get the A-level grades I was predicted, and went to what was Bristol Poly. And all my teachers said, well, you need to retake your A-level year and you need to go again and you need to go somewhere better. But actually the experience of going to somewhere that became a university while I was there put me into a much more diverse education community than I would have experienced if I'd gone straight into a Russell Group university. So it's about what you can take from those different experiences that you have. So I did my degree, I did my PGCE, I did a master's, I taught for a year in Lincoln, and then I did my master's at LSE. I then ran a head of department post for 5 years, then I ran a head of faculty post where I did a lot of sixth form because I worked in a top 10 sixth form college. And then when we moved house for my husband's job back in 2008, we moved in opposite our local outstanding school. It's literally, we live opposite the school. And I thought, well, I can't work there. And at that point, I'd always worked in catchment because I kind of moved and got somewhere locally to live around things. I thought, I can't work there. So I'll just look at the local university. I had 2 very small daughters at the time. They were 3 and 7. I thought, well, I'll look at the local university because I'd done quite a lot of teacher education work when I was in schools, got a post straight away, like within 6 weeks. So I was very fortunate that something came up around that time, and spent 10 years working in universities, studying for my doctorate in education, and moving from a newish university to a Russell Group university as part of that process, and being made, you know, fellow of the academy, fellow of the higher academy, got my doctorate. Started supervising doctoral students, and that's what I do part-time now with the University of Liverpool. And I think Emma's discussion there about flexible living, the sorts of things you want to do with your life, are really important. I have a full-time senior leader role in my city. I run the Teaching School Alliance, I work with heads, I support heads. It's a very busy role, but the fact that I'm able to do some doctoral supervision with 3 people who are also teaching full-time themselves is really important, and it's part of that kind of ongoing journey that we have through our lives. So just using this as a device really to think about what you've done in your life, where perhaps your gaps are that you want to fill. You know, I'm a big advocate of MA Ed and EdD learning. It is really useful as a technique. So what I wanted to focus on specifically is about why women need supporting in the glass cliff roles that we've got, and what these often look like in our education system now. The glass cliff roles are really fascinating for me. So I work with lots of schools at the moment who've never had female heads before, but they have female heads now, and yet they're really challenged schools. Now, I'm not saying all female heads work in schools that are really challenging. You know, some people work in schools that are differently challenging, highly academic performing, that kind of thing. But for me, embracing the challenge was something I was kind of told from the off. So my granny was a teaching assistant. She was kicked out of home aged 11 when her father died. She was sent into service at 14. She didn't have the qualifications to be a teacher, but she worked with her head teacher and her class of children they had a 40-year partnership in a South London school. So to me, I grew up with these strong female role models who said, this is what teaching is. You know, we take kids in, we scrub them up, we, you know, care for them in all those ways. And now in our system and the way in which our education system runs now, it's not quite like that. But my granny knew that she wanted my mum to be a qualified teacher. My mum went to Frobel, which at the time is now Roehampton Institute, which at the time was very child-centric. And I remember my mum saying to me that the best part of teaching was teaching in the 70s, when they didn't have fences, they didn't have walls, they didn't, you know, they could choose what they wanted to teach way before the national curriculum. So this idea that women had empowerment, women had qualifications, women could use their empowerment in learning was kind of something that I completely grew up with. So I grew up with my mum helping make some of the spare rib. So they would have spare rib meetings in our front room, and my dad would bring in their teas for that. And that was part of that discussion. It was part of that environment that I grew up with in the 80s. And then I know Jill Berry's on this call and she will recognise the photo of this school. This isn't her school, this is the other school in Bedford. But I grew up in Bedfordshire, where we had then the three-story, I think it still does actually, have a three-tier system. And at the end of my year in middle school, I had my first day at my school I went to, which is the one on the bottom here, not the one on the top. All my friends that were with me in school were not in my middle school. They had all gone into the local independent school trust and they were educated there, and nobody had actually explained to me that that was happening. So it gave me quite an interesting insight into the way in which some of our educational segregation can work in society. Now, at the same time as that was happening, the glass ceiling definition came out in 1984 about this barrier of people being promoted beyond middle management, and was kind of quite actively discussed. And I was very fortunate because I went to a school where these sorts of things were really well talked about. And these were kind of my influences on me in the 90s. People like Sylvia Wolby writing a book that theorised patriarchy. You know, you can do whatever you want, you can go and teach. You know, the Francis Fukuyama book always amuses me. You know, at the end of history and the last man, where are we in that story? So we've had as a society these kind of big meta-narratives through time. And by the time I was going to university in the early 90s, liberal democracy had kind of won out. And so that's what Francis Fukuyama's book was about. So it made me kind of question that, what it means to be liberal, having those freedom of ideas, focusing on individual rights, being broad-minded. And actually, we have this daily challenge as women. So very sadly this week, somebody that lived around the corner from me was sentenced to life for the murder of his wife and her partner. And this statistic of 2 women a week dying in the UK from domestic violence, it's probably far more than that. It was certainly higher than that in lockdown, as any of the organisations that work with women and domestic violence can tell you. We know that inequality disproportionately affects women. We know that women are, you know, particularly after 10 years of austerity, we know that women are going to be more hard hit from this recession that we've got now post the pandemic. We know that women are less likely to be professional and less likely to have occupational pensions, as the value of the state pension, and I'm talking here with an English focus, of course, to an international audience, as the value of the state pension in England falls anyway. So I taught politics and sociology for a long time, and as part of that kind of learning journey, I guess, one of the things we would teach was the work of Paulo Freire, who had a social concept grounded in Marxist critical theory about conscientiousization. And I'm not a Marxist, but the concept of conscientiousization I thought was absolutely fascinating in the way it came out yesterday. So I particularly enjoyed listening to Anjum talk about the stories and how her motivation for being involved in literature was wanting to get to the end, but being made conscious through those stories. And this always is a kind of theme for me with the 4 WomenEd campaigns that we've got. We have to help a larger number of women and men be aware of structural inequalities. So if we accept our systemic inequalities, how do we better use the education system to address them? We need to work out how we play a part, where our energy is best directed. And with Glass Cliffs, we can see, you know, there was a lot made on LinkedIn and on social media, for example, about how COVID had better statistics with countries who had led with female leaders. But we know that historically, women pick up the mess. That's what women do. You know, if you're running a family, you do not let your family fall apart. You do your best to make sure that your family are as functional as they possibly can be. So there's lots in sociological literature about the dual burden, the triple burden, the quadruple burden, but we know that most women have low paid, challenging work. I heard something on the radio the other week about a woman who'd phoned in because she was on a 0 hours contract in a school as a special needs teacher with more than 20 years experience. And she'd taken that because it fitted her own domestic circumstances. But of course, lockdown happened and they had no money. I mean, it's a really good example of how low paid, challenging work, even in teaching that we consider to have professional status, still is leading people to actively use food banks at the moment. We understand that issue around childcare. Later you are, the older you are having your children, the more of a sandwich generation you're going to be, because you're simultaneously looking after your younger children and looking after your older children as well. We understand that we take more of a burden around elderly care with an ageing population. And the thing that I think lots of female leaders, when I talk to female leaders about the work and the challenges they do, a lot of the bit that goes unrecognised is the emotion work in what they do. And you know, the quick summary for that is remembering birthdays, doing Christmas. You know, if you're working right the way up until the end of term, when's your Christmas shopping done? Yeah, it might be dropped off for you now. You've still got to sit down and do that Christmas order. And the more financially challenged you are, frankly, the harder that is to do. Okay, so I think this notion that, as Emma's just really well described, that whole process around patchwork living flexibly is what women have to do. And we've made quite rigid, quite inflexible work for us because we've had to. But Emma's quite right, it doesn't have to look like that. It doesn't have to be like that at all. So I kind of grew up with this kind of glass cliffs analogy and thought that this glass cliffs analogy was, you know, something that by the time I was an adult, by the time I was a qualified professional, things would have got better and things would have improved. And actually, the challenge is still here and still probably worse now. It feels to me as a feminist, as an education professional, that we're almost going backwards. We know that the polarisation of our politics disaffects women greater. We know that 49% voted out of the EU in the Brexit referendum, not the 52%. And we know that our shared parental leave is really low, when in Sweden it's nearly a third. Girls may be getting better results, but STEM careers, and I'm director of a science learning partnership, one of the things I do at work, STEM careers are still nudging along 30% and haven't got any better in the decades that the DFE have been pouring money in through things like STEM Learning UK. So we've got some real structural kind of challenges that I thought we would have solved by now, and we haven't. We haven't even dented some of them. So we've got various kind of glass ceiling derivatives. So in Asian communities, to describe Asian employment challenges, Jane Hun described or coined the term bamboo ceiling. And here's a picture of Bishop Libby Lane. My son is my 10-year-old is a chorister at Derby Cathedral. So we see Libby very often. She's tipped to be the next Archbishop of England. Of course, that's a role that a female has never heard. So there are lots of different ways in which the glass ceiling kind of plays out across different sections all the time. So glass cliffs, individuals belonging to particular groups, women, global majority groups. We know that women are more likely to be found in leadership positions that are associated with greater risk of failure. We know that women and people from global majority groups are likely to face more public criticism. We know that we have more scrutiny on the way in which the role is done. And I'm not going to play you that link, but it's embedded in my slides. Have a watch of it. You know, there are lots of challenges from women's roles that are not really recognised in terms of the daily work that we do as female senior leaders in education. So in the UK, we've had leading change from various political fronts. Harriet Harman is the person I kind of go to for the amount of change that we've managed to achieve politically. But we've also, of course, had our huge political losses. I'm just going to leave that on the screen for a minute, because Jo Cox was a student with me at LSE when I did my master's. And I think any woman who sacrifices their life for their political values is something that shouldn't happen. So I work as a systems leader. And people often say, so what is a system leader? And for those of you particularly outside our English context, a systems leader is where we've had a decline over the last few decades of what we called social democratic provision. So we used to have something called a welfare state. Now we would say that we're probably living in what Sally Tomlinson, the Oxford Professor of Education, described as a post-welfare society. So we had the rise of the new right in the 1980s from Margaret Thatcher's government. government, and we've had kind of neoliberal, what the academics would probably term as neoliberal dominance since then. And what that really means is we've had scarcity of resources in the state sector, and that's not changing. You know, we have lots of different challenges. COVID has, of course, been our most recent one. Austerity was our challenge before that, about how you supported families to best support their children in their learning. So for my role, provision to schools is eroded over time. They have real-term budget reductions. Funding comes through bids made available by the DfE, and successful bids result in additional work to support those schools. And that's what I do as director of a teaching school. So I run initial teacher education, I run governance support, I run STEM learning in order to support schools. And in the city that I work in, of the secondary heads, we have 11 out of 24 who are now women, so 46%. But many of those are heads of failing schools. Only 2 are rated outstanding. 1 is led by a woman, the other's led by a chap, but only 1 of those schools is rated good. The rest are RI and special measures. And that kind of gives you an example of the sort of the backdrop, the contextual backdrop and the deprivation that we work with. So I have a range of kind of current influences on me because, yes, I'm a senior leader in education, but I'm an academic. I read a lot, I write a lot, I publish. And some of the influences that have been on me most recently, this actually before the whole kind of Black Lives Matters thing kicked off again this year, were around white privilege and the way in which people use white privilege to disempower other groups. And White Fragility is a really good read from Robin Diaglo. If you haven't read that, I'd really recommend that as a read. So we know from the research that was in our last Women Ed book that was put together that male primary head teachers earn £1,700 a year more than female equivalents. We know that only 7% of women in education attempt to negotiate their initial salary offer. And it was great watching the chat yesterday about different people saying, I've just negotiated my salary for the first time and I was comfortable in doing that. And yet we know that 57% of men already do that. And somebody around the whole issue of what different roles that people can have in society. And I thought that was in terms of going for jobs and what jobs you go for. And I thought that was really interesting. So we know the statistics around multi-academy trusts and £100 earned by a man, £68.30 earned by a woman. We know that. So the critical thing for me is the research that's done in the area. So we know in England, our education workforce is more than 80% female. Head teachers at secondary only account for around 38%. Statistics are shifting. As I said, in my city, they're now 46%. And there's been some brilliant writing over the decades that I've been teaching from Marion Coleman, from Jackie Lumby, from Anne West. There are key educational researchers in this area. And Kay Fuller, who's one of our own Women Ed community, with her book Gender and Educational Leadership, just published a few years ago. But there are still barriers about women putting themselves forward for SLT and for headship. And one of my doctoral students is examining those barriers at the moment about what is it that actually gets in our way. So coming back to Emma's living flexibly approach, you know, these are the challenges really that we have to face in order to change the system. So if you're out there and you're trying to change the system, where's the support? Well, you already know the support's here because you're here, so that's great. But actually, as Penny Rabinger was pointing out to me on a call we did this week, only 4% of teachers are on Twitter. Okay, so that's our challenge, isn't it, in the Women Ed community? We may be on message around these 4 campaigns, but it's actually about reaching out to those people, those teachers who have never heard of Twitter, have never heard of Women Ed, do not know that there's groups, you know, like ours and research being done in academic circles like this. So where else? You know, BAMEd, Diverse Ed, Chartered College, but it's really about the allies in promoting he for she, changing those posts, putting women in posts and enabling the mentoring and coaching programs and the supervision of that, the challenges, the work Jill Berry's done around making the leap from deputy head to headship. You know, they are particularly important. And, you know, it's a sad thing when things like the Women Leading in Education coaching, I've got a couple of coachees through that. I'm keeping my coachees. We were never paid through WLAE for them anyway, but for the government to axe that as a scheme, it sends a signal that those are not issues anymore. They've been dealt with now, so it doesn't need to exist. And that, of course, as we know, is quite wrong. So what I wanted to do a bit this morning was just help people understand the policy landscape, and I hope I've done that a little bit in England and shown some of the challenges that exist in the English system, and that is what I'm talking about. But the way around understanding that policy landscape with any depth is about getting educated. It is about doing an MA Ed. It is about doing an education doctorate. It is about the fact that we have a neoliberal, and in fact most academics would argue it's a neoconservative government, which is quite different. It's here for another 9 years. It got a big majority. So how do we influence that agenda? What needs to change? We need to be involved, we need to be motivated, and we need to change the landscape. And we need to hold on to those 4 different current strands of WomenEd campaign for the way in which we change those. It's a good campaign, it covers all bases. So we're going to do something. I thought 20 minutes might be too long for me to talk to you on my own. So we're going to do something a little bit 10% braver in our house this morning. We're going to talk about one 16-year-old's current experience. So this is my daughter, and this is why I know things need to change. This is my 16-year-old, and we have regular conversations about how much feminism is discussed in her school, how comfortable you feel, Jo, talking about feminism in your school. So tell the WomenEd audience a bit about that. How's that work for you?
Well, feminism isn't really discussed in school. It's not really something we learn in PDC, and I know PDC is different in all schools. It's sometimes called citizenship, but it's not really discussed, which leads to conversations sort of out of a classroom environment led by a teacher, sort of conversations where teachers aren't involved just between students, which isn't always the best, as you don't have, so if you're in an argument with someone about it, you don't always have that backup and support from a teacher.
And what kind of conversations do you have then with people in your class that you would like to have backup and support? What kind of things are said?
Well, even this week, a boy said to me, would you count yourself as a feminist? And I said, yes. And he said, really? But there are some quite he said nutty ones or batty ones or something. And that sort of stereotype achieves nothing, and it's just completely false. And to have a teacher back you up and say, that's completely irrelevant, would be extremely helpful in a situation like that.
Would you say you're encouraged in the school? We talked a lot yesterday, everybody, about school cultures and how each school has a different culture and how important school culture is. Would you say you're encouraged to be a feminist in school?
I'd say because it's not discussed, we're not encouraged to be one, but also not discouraged.
Okay, so it's not on the agenda.
No.
And that really brings me back to Emma's session about, you know, inviting yourself in, as Emma and Julia have said, inviting yourself into the conversations. That takes a level of agency. Agency is something that's learned. Agency is something that your qualifications and your knowledge base give you. They give you more agency to have the confidence to have those conversations. And it's very hard at 15 or 16, Josie, you're 11, to have those conversations. We mentioned the word fat yesterday. Tell everybody why we mentioned that.
Just the way boys describe women and talk about them. So in our free period where we catch up on homework, one boy just started completely going off about a girl and her body, to which a lot of people called him out, but he only apologised once we'd called him out and described why he was wrong and how he was wrong. And he said, well, I'll say sorry to her then. And she wasn't there. And we said, no, because that'll just upset her to hear that you've been talking about her behind her back. But it's just, again, there was no teacher input there, even though it was quite a loud discussion. And there was a female teacher in the room. But it's just completely written off as a joke or banter when it's just not.
we've been talking about the way at home, about the way in which social media is used. So that thing about Twitter only being 4%. Talk to me about you use TikTok, which I don't use, and Instagram and Snapchat. So talk to me about your TikTok feed and how it works.
So on TikTok, you have what's called a For You page, and any videos you like, it's an algorithm where you get videos that you'll know you like, which is good, but it just reinforces whatever ideals you've had. So if you like more kind of liberal videos, if your TikTok's more political, then you'll just keep getting those. Whereas if you like more conservative videos, you'll just keep getting those. It just reinforces what ideals you already have.
So I was trying to explain to Jo the way in which in mass media, the discussion of mass media in sociology, A-level, for example, we talk about that in terms of media amplification and the media amplifying things. So for example, murder, people thinking that murder that I've just mentioned in this session is far more common than it actually is. But actually what's happening through social media is that we are in these echo chambers. We hear our own voices, our own beliefs echo back to us. And you can then see that played out, not just in presidential debates, but the way in which we've gone in terms of our political systems in the UK and US and elsewhere in the world to be increasingly kind of polarized. And for me, the question of intersectionality is really important here. So we had some really great inputs yesterday. I loved Geraldine's input and the amount that she was doing in Lancaster. I thought it was really, really influential. And the intersectionality between your gender, your class, your race, your position, whether or not you're a member of a large community or just a one member into a homogenous community, so atypical. Bucky was just talking this morning on the discussion about being an atypical person in many ways. So the intersectionalities there are really important. So before we finish, I've got some references there that I'm going to leave up that are important. I put this list up at an event we had for early career teachers, and not the list on the right, not the qualifications, but the list on the left is what I think we need to focus on. We need to keep on being passionate. We need to be brave. We need to keep learning. We need to be clear. Get a mentor, get a coach. If you're not sure how to have that conversation about living flexibly, get one, use it, use other people to help empower you, use the networks. Think about whether or not you stay in a school because it's the right environment for you versus that varied experience that we were talking about. But stay in education. There's lots of different roles in education that are not necessarily the school that you're in now or the school you might think you want to work in. So have a look at that wide range of options. So that's us done, Jules.
Oh, wow. I've got goosebumps. I just want to say thank you so much to Jo for joining us. That was it was brilliant to hear your voice. I know there's loads of comments in the chat about that. So thank you so much, Jo. And just hearing your experience has made me think. I work in a special school and I was thinking, well, I never talk about feminism in a special school and I really should, just because there's predominantly boys there, and we do have discussions on racism and things, but actually feminism is not something I've necessarily discussed. So my pledge to you is that I will discuss feminism in the special school with my pupils. So thank you for that. A fascinating talk, Deb. Thank you. I feel very inspired by it, and you know, that imposter syndrome thing that I'm not supposed to have anymore. I always have it when I listen to you, but it's in a good way.
But you see, Jules, this is part of our wider conversation, isn't it? So I submitted something with a quick bit of writing, person didn't come back to me, and I instantly thought, oh God, the tone's wrong, I've got it wrong, they're not going to submit it, it's awful. We all have it. We all have it. We all have it on different levels, no matter who we are, no matter where we are on our learning journeys. And we all have to acknowledge that as part of the discussion.
Yeah, that's so true. And there is very much that idea, particularly I know with Women Ed, because we're all busy volunteers, that we don't necessarily get back to people as quickly as we'd like sometimes. And like you say, I think I'd hate it that people were thinking, oh, we didn't get back for that reason. So yeah, we're that's something, isn't it, to check and just say, have you received my email? Or you know, just small things like that can really help, can't they? Because we build a narrative in our head sometimes that you know, they don't value me, they don't want me, and I think that's a really interesting way of looking at imposter syndrome, actually. Thank you.
I will stop my screen share and just a few
that would be
there
great.
that are on my slides that people might like.
We can catch up with thank you, Joe, as well. I just want to say a big clap for Joe and for Deb there. That's brilliant. Just a few people have asked about things like slides and recordings. We've recorded all these sessions over the Women Ed Unconference, and they will be going onto YouTube. So you can watch them again if you'd like to, or if you've missed ones that you'd like to have seen, then you can watch those. We will get the slides off people as well. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get them on our new website. Now we have somebody helping us with that. So it'd be great to get the slides on as well. But if you really want some slides and you don't hear, or they're not on the website, then do let us know, because we can always just send them to you. So please ask if you need them before they come up. Liz, I think it's nearly time for your panel. 1 minute. We're doing very well on time. So I'm going to hand over to you. And I'm really looking forward to this one on flexible working, or sorry, flexible living.
There we go.
A whole new phrase.
Put my screen up if that's okay, Jules.
Yeah, you should be able to just be able to do that.
Awesome. This is a beautiful thing. Okay, welcome everybody. I've just checked the chat, and I think we have everybody in who's going to be speaking. So thank you, everybody. I'm just going to do a quick some housekeeping things, and then we'll move into the panel discussion. My name is Liz Free. I'm calling you, if it's a bit echoey, from a tower in the middle of Tuscany. It sounds extremely glamorous, and it is to a certain degree. So some of you, I know many of you actually, but those of you that I don't know, I'm a director and CEO of an international school in Switzerland. I moved in the summer from my previous role as director in the Netherlands, in a school group in the Netherlands. And yeah, we've just made it to half term. So this is our first Sunday of half term, because we start in August. And so if I'm slightly incoherent, it will be because of that. But I've loved the session so far. What a weekend it's been. My brain is just so full. But anyway, now we're going to talk about flexible working. But I think after the session earlier, we should call it flexible living. Much better break. But I'm going to run through some quick housekeeping things. Menti, we try to capture as much as we can over the weekend with anything we do with Women Ed, really, is how can we, what impact are we having? How are we supporting the community best? How are we engaging with each other and building that network that we were just talking about, and those connections both on Twitter and beyond. So if you can go to Menti, that's menti.com, and then you use the code 9622356. That is 96256. I feel like I'm on some like TV broadcast here. I'm just some like protection stuff. But anyway, here we go, 9622356, and we'll put it in the chat as well so that you can see. It's really important for us to capture that. Also, if you want to chat with people and ask questions and engage in this conversation, because we'll be monitoring those as we go through the conversation, please do so. But it's really important to remember, when you write your comment, it automatically defaults to only come to the panelists. If you want everyone else to see it as well, put panelists and attendees. Just a top tip from me. It's useful if you put your Twitter name in, and if you're putting any commentary on Twitter or on your social media, it's #WomenEd, and then we can track it really fully. So let's move on. What are we going to talk about? Well, we're talking about the idea of flexible working, what it's meant during this COVID period for us all. And we've got some amazing group of panelists who have given their time freely. So thank you everybody in advance. And this is one of our 4 main campaigns in Women Ed, is to think about how we can advocate for flexible working, as we know the impact that that can have specifically for women, as we try to keep the women within the profession and to harness the potential that they have right across the world. And so we're going to focus on that particular aspect today. This is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about COVID and the experiences that we've had and how that's impacted on the way that we work and what the learning has been through this time. It's really interesting. Almost every session has mentioned this in some way, and the slight chaos that has ensued around how we carry on a continuity of education for our students, but what impact that has had on us, the good, the bad and the ugly. And then we're going to look at how we can affect lasting change. Can we use this as an impetus to really move the conversation on? I'm going to leave this slide up during our session. The panelists, we've got Fee, Tasha, Hilary, Katie and Lucy. They're going to talk for 5 minutes each, and I will get into trouble with Vivian. She'll start sending me messages. I get these alerts saying, oh, there we are, there's probably one coming in now, saying, Liz, stick to time. You've got 5 minutes each. And Fee, could I invite you to kick us off? Are you there?
Yay! Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
Yay!
Cracking. Okay, right. I'll be good and stick to my 5 minutes. Okay, we're good. So I'm going to talk about lost leaders and the lack of flexible working or flexible living that contributes to us losing leaders. Because a few weeks ago, my mum passed away, and it's been really clear to see in the community how much of a loss she has been. There are groups that are lacking a chairperson, a board member, a trustee, a member, an advocate, all sorts. And it's clear that the community has lost one of its leaders. But it's not the first time that she's been lost, because for the first 15 or so years of her primary teaching career, she wanted to be ahead. She wanted to be SLT. But by the time I was 8 or 9, she had left her last permanent contract because her school was not willing to be flexible and support the balance that she needed between her family and her career. And I never really knew about this until about a year ago when she mentioned it in passing. And she said that essentially it was just something that wasn't meant to be. It didn't work for her, it wasn't meant to be. And I argued with her at the time, actually, that it could have been, and it perhaps should have been, because she had an enormous amount of leadership talent, and that went into the community. She's done an enormous amount of good, but it should have been in education. And education have really, really lost out time and time again with probably hundreds of women who have decided that leadership just isn't for them or wasn't meant to be. And whilst things are perhaps getting better, actually how many leaders are we losing because we're not thinking flexibly? And how many times have we sat and thought, and I do it myself, I sit and I think, I'm so lucky that my school supports me being flexible. And it shouldn't be that way at all. Actually, it should be my school saying, we're really lucky. We've got a leader here, a potential leader who has a really rich, full life, who can see things from multiple perspectives, who can prioritise, who has bold enough claims to say, hey, I'm flexible, I'm part-time, I'm not doing that. That's not worth my time. Because if it's not worth my time, then it's not really worth the time of the rest of your staff. But perhaps those part-timers and those flexible workers are the ones that are putting their hands up and saying it. And really, I think we need to move towards this place where we have got those really enriched leaders and those really enriched lives in our schools and in our educational communities. And there are 4 things that really I think our current leaderships or SLT need to be doing in order to get those people on board. And the first one is advertise or offer. I don't know how many times I've looked at jobs and said, they've not said or part-time, so I'm not going to go for that. Because really, my life's already really full, and lots of part-timers have already made lots of compromises. The last thing they want to be is feeling like they're going to be a compromise for someone else. And if schools simply put or part-time or flexible working in their adverts, then all of a sudden you have perhaps a plethora more people applying, and if the job's not for them and the school's not for them, or it doesn't work, fine, but what if you're missing out? Like, those few little words can make a massive difference. We've got to start doing that. And then once you've got those part-timers on your staff, talk to them, ask them what they need, ask them what balance they need. Part-time and flexible working comes in all sorts of different shapes, and really we can't be having a blanket approach. We need to be responding to the needs of those part-timers. Plan, considering their needs, like, get your staff happy, you know, make them feel like they're part of your team. You can't be rearranging meetings and putting lots of onus on them and increasing their workload because you haven't kind of worked out how this works for them. And the last thing is accept them and appreciate them. No jokes, no banter, no inconvenient part-timers, which I've heard so many times. And really, we need to make sure that part-time doesn't mean an extra workload, because what can happen really easily is that instead of getting these amazing enriched people, we simply lose leaders. And sometimes we can help it, sometimes we can't, and education needs to be the place that can help losing them and stops losing them. And I think that's my 5.
You did it! You know,
Hey!
Althea, I know today was a particularly important day for you as well, because I know you've had quite a challenging few weeks, and it's also your mum's birthday today. And so, you know, we talked about whether this was the right time for you, and you really wanted to do this. And I'm really amazed by your clarity and your ability to do this. So thank you deeply.
You're welcome.
It was, a big ask, but something that your mum would have wanted to hear as well. Yeah. And so thank you. Okay. Also, now we're going to move on to Tasha. Tasha, where are you?
Oh, I'm here, Liz. I'm here.
Introduce yourself, Tasha. I know you've been here all morning.
Yeah, unfortunately so, but fortunately for me as well, I didn't have to log back in. So, hello everyone. I'm Tasha. I'm currently, like Liz, I'm stuck up here in a hotel for the past month in Istanbul, Turkey. So I've tried to create a background here this morning. So if this falls down, it's me creating a background. I just wanted to start off by acknowledging it was Victoria in the chat who was asking about early years teachers. So I am an early years teacher, Victoria, and I know that you were asking about how you can contribute or be a part of Women's Ed. You're already a part of Women's Ed being here today, so thank you for stepping into our conference today. Okay, and I see that someone has given you some information so that you can join in or email Women's Ed to be part of the team and present. So I just wanted to share my screen, Liz, so that I can start off. Is that possible? Okay. Okay. So today I just wanted to start off. I quickly changed my flexible working to flexible working and living features after hearing the speech before. And I think that's quite suitable. So we'll kick off with that. So today I will be busting the myths about flexible working. So I started off thinking about flexible working after I've had a horrible end of school year as a head teacher in Poland. And it didn't go down too well with me, what they were asking us to do and the types of things that we actually had to do and the things that I actually had to ask my teachers to do. So here I am busting the myths with that. So 1, if my business promotes flexible work life, everyone will rush to take it and there will be nobody left to do the work. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. flexible working and a flexible work life should not be something that businesses or employers see that we as employees will not be there to perform the work that they ask us to do. There should be some degree or amount of trust in us. It will cost too much. Quite on the contrary, flexible working or living does not cost a thing. It actually saves businesses money, in so much so that they'll have to provide smaller workspaces, electricity, and all of that. Part-time employees are less committed than full-time employees. Now, we all know that's absolutely rubbish talk as well, because we have seen more part-time employees work harder than full-time employees ever can in some organizations. Flexible work arrangements will mean there are no employees available for rosters. But it's quite the opposite, really. When flexible work arrangements, you do have more employees available for the rosters, which means that they can come in at times that are suitable to them, and also that suits the organization. So how do I know people are working if I can't see them? Again, I say that's on the employer in trying to micromanage people. I'm not in the business of micromanaging people. For example, the Falkland Islands, working in the Falkland Islands is a perfect example of working flexibly and not micromanaging. I've had the opportunity to work in the Falkland Islands, and we did camp education, and in the camp education system, there are teachers working for days and weeks and sometimes months without any supervision at all. And we're working, leading learning, and learning is taking place. So more rubbish talks, more myths about flexible working. So I started thinking about some flexible working or living solutions. And of course, based on things that I've been hearing from my colleagues, from friends, especially throughout this pandemic, where our employers are thinking that this is flexible working. Quite rightfully, it's not, it isn't. It was us coping and actually showing that the flexible working can happen, but right now we are being pushed into something sort of resembling flexible working because there is just no trust with employees at this time. So performance issues usually pre-exist flexible working arrangements, and any organization's performance management framework should guide managers and supervisors in managing an employee's performance. What that sort of would mean is that discussions, communication, negotiation, and trust, most importantly, are all important elements of open, transparent, and consistent decision-making in relation to requests for flexible work. So on a whole, in the long term, creating more flexible, diverse and inclusive workforce will generate productivity for us, increase workforce participation, and also improve our workforce culture. So what are some of those drivers of flexibility? We've got aging populations and increased pension age, increased caring responsibilities for families, increased public and social security costs, dual income households where both parents work, and now we have younger employees seeking out jobs with more flexibility, and there is also a growing skill gap. So how are the benefits of flexible work or living arrangements best suited to employees and employers? So for organizations offering flexible work or living arrangements, they can improve workplace productivity and financial performance, enable the organization to be more sustainable and adaptable to change, assist with talent attraction, including broadening their employment pool, increasing staff engagement, cooperation, commitment, and motivation, and assisting with worker retention and the reduction of recruitment costs. most of all, reducing stress in the workplace and providing a pathway for gender equality. And for employees, flexible working or living offers the opportunity to all of us to engage with other workers and customers if working on alternate sites, focus on specific tasks away from busy and often noisy workstations, which we know can cause lots of distractions, balance child and other family responsibility. As women, we always get that. We need flexible working because we have children. Those are some of the myths and all of that. But it's not just a myth that we need flexible working because of our family responsibilities. What we need flexible work-life balance because as women, we are makers of our households. We are also leaders in the industry, and we do need that work-life balance. Reducing stress, once again, and increasing job satisfaction and productivity. And of course, save on transport costs and commuting time. And I think that is my 5 minutes. So thank you very much, everyone. Back to you, Liz.
Thank you so much, Tasha. That was brilliant and gave such a strong case from so many different perspectives. I've also just had a mention from Vivian to think about. There's a lot of resources on the Chartered College that have got case studies around flexible working, which can be really helpful. I thought, well, one of the things that resonated for me in what you said is that the idea of if you can't see them, if you can't see the member of staff, then how do you know that they're doing their job? And I think when we think about the COVID period, it's been a real eye-opener about how we're working all of the time, and seeing that kind of micromanagement idea. Those days have long gone in so many industries, and in education we need to think more creatively as well. We'll talk more about that when we get to the Q&A. That was a brilliant session. Thank you, Tasha. Okay, who are we going to next? Let me get my list up. So we're going to go to Hilary. Thank you, Tasha. Hilary, where are you?
I'm here. Hi.
Hi, Hilary. Go for it.
Hiya. Hello, everybody. So I'm a school business leader. So I've been looking at the impact of flexible working on a kind of operational and HR basis, which is kind of where I'm coming from. And I think that the lockdown, particularly in the UK, and the whole impact of COVID-19 has been to prove that flexible working is absolutely possible in a way that we've never had before. So we've got an evidence base now that we can use to say it does work, we've seen it work, and that trust has now been built. I think there's always been that kind of historic, working from home, flexible working type view that it was somehow of less importance or less thorough, but now we've proved that we've been able to do it. We've run schools effectively for many, many months, and what we've also seen is a window into people's lives in a way that we haven't seen before. Because we've been doing Zoom meetings, we've seen children interrupting people, we've seen their houses, we've seen their lives happening. And I think as leaders, that's given us a window into the people that we're employing, the people we work with, to see them as far more as human beings, as working parents, as individuals who've got responsibilities. And as leaders, we've modelled that as well, and people have learned more about our lives and who we are during that period too. So even though it's been a really challenging period, it's given us, I think, massive opportunities to rethink what we thought was the position in terms of flexible working, working from home, all of those other things. Lots of my colleagues have spoken about that time, that lockdown time, as a gift that where they've had time to spend with their families, with their children, and see them living and working and going through their lives in a way that we would never have normally had we been at work all of that time. And I know it's challenged my own thinking, because I was probably less receptive to flexible working, because I think even I had that kind of, well, how are you going to get your work done if you're not actually in the office? Or how are you going to condense those hours? It's just a struggle for me to conceive how that might work. But having done it and seen people working creatively and flexibly, as leaders, I think we're far more able to be convinced by that. And I think what we've also seen is that the whole business sector, the whole corporate world has modelled that, and they're continuing to do that. Those big, massive companies, those global corporations are taking the very best of that and realising the positives. So we've got models that we can use to go forward, rather than to have to be sort of that one leader who's making that brave decision. And so the trust is that build up of trust is a really important thing, but also the technology's been there. The technology, which we could never really foresee how we could connect with people electronically if they weren't physically in the same room as us. Now we've had to prove that, and it's tried and it's tested, and we're all experts now in Zoom meetings, in connecting electronically, in not having to be physically present in the room. And I think, I mean, there's the rest of the world is having to adapt as well. There's things that are still clunky. I mean, I've had telephone calls from the bank wondering why I've approved all my back payments at 11 o'clock at night and rejecting them. But that was the way we worked. You know, it's a really hot day. My finance officer was working from home and going swimming. At one point, I was doing something else. And so that's what I did. So we've got adaptations to make as we go along. But I think on the flip side of that, if we are looking at flexible working, it's also really important that we manage that and don't become available 24/7. So we've got to come up with ways as leaders to make sure that those working hours are contained, and we're not all becoming blurrily available, and that the distinction between home and work is still fairly clear. Because we continue to give. But as leaders, I think we've got to make sure that we're not asking too much and we're not encroaching, and we still maintain that balance. But what I've also learned is the amount of time that just being in school sucks up, just being around people. And whilst it's really important as managers that we do that, my time travelling to work, my time taken just getting to the office and passing lots of different people along the way and just passing the time of day means that actively you can condense your work if you're not physically present and be far more effective and efficient, even though you do lose that human interaction to some extent. And there are the financial savings. I'll come back to this as a business leader, of not having people in the building for all of that time. And one really interesting point is during the whole of lockdown in my school, we didn't have a single person phoning sick in the traditional way that they would have done outside of coronavirus type illnesses. And that proved to me that people were going to give everything they could possibly give. But sometimes that physical journey of having to come in and work and be there for that set amount of time was a challenge, and was sometimes a blocker to people being able to be present in the way that they can in a flexible working environment. So I think in terms of lasting change, employers don't have that excuse that they don't know how it can work. They absolutely do now, and we've proven it. So there's the opportunity to call on past experience in a way that there hasn't been, and proven success. And I think we as leaders, we need to model that from the top. I said before, we've had that insight into each other's lives, and I think it's far more okay now to say that, your child has this need during the day, or you need to do the school run, or you've got elderly parents, or you've got all of those other things, because everyone has now experienced that need, and it's far more acceptable to talk about those things than it's ever been before. And I think my last bit of advice from an HR point of view would be, if you are thinking about submitting a flexible working request, don't go in with a piece of paper saying it's my right and I demand this. Do some research, think about how it can work, and give them the solutions at the same time as you're giving them the request, because nobody knows your role better than you. Nobody knows how it could work better than you do, and nobody wants it to work better than you or more than you. So if you do that research, come in with the solutions, prove how it's worked, prove how it could work, and really be explicit about the benefits to you and your employer, then the job's done, isn't it? It's a really difficult thing to say no when all of those positives are already written down. And the practicalities of timetabling. Also, I think timetablers have traditionally tried to build breaks into people's days to give them that, to kind of expand on their timetable to fill the week, but actually it's just an ask, isn't it, to ask people to compress it so that that flexible working is more possible. So yeah, I think my time's probably up. I could go on forever, but I hope that's been useful.
So important to have different perspectives and different roles represented within Women Ed as well. And I think some of the points you were making is about taking that ownership and coming at the case, if you're looking to put a case forward, that you do that in a formal, thought through way, so that you can make it as easy as possible for the person sat at the other side of that desk to say yes. So do your homework. I think that's really important. I thought it's really interesting that you mentioned the tech side of things as well, and how that supported the process. And as Elaine also mentioned that in the chat, she was talking about the importance of meetings, that through this COVID period, many schools have now started recording their briefings, their CPD sessions, their meetings. And so now we don't have that one point of time that we all need to be in one place. And when we think about a global profession, of course, you know, we've got people all around the world, different time zones. We've got some teachers stuck in certain countries that can't move to other countries, and they're still providing an education for students. This is a really amazing moment for us all to start to think, well, the idea of the sort of Monday morning briefing or the Friday morning briefing, does it need to be like that anymore? Is that the most effective way to communicate and keep everybody in touch? So thank you. And I love learning about your journey as well and your reflections, your personal reflections. I'm going to move on. So I'm aware of time. We've got 11 minutes left. And I would like to get to some questions as well. But I'm going to move on to Katie. Katie, thank you, Hilary. Katie, where are you? Katie in the house.
You would think I would have learned about mute by now. Hello, I'm in a very stormy Somerset where the internet has gone down, so I'm hotspotting from my phone and I hope it works, but there's the rain going horizontally. Thank you so much for having me, and I wanted to start by thanking the Women Ed Network generally, and the kind of the bravery that it inspires, certainly in me, and I know in so many other women. And I suspect the odd man. One of the things that inspired me personally so I started an organisation called Now Teach about 4 years ago with the journalist Lucy Kellaway, and our thing, if you like, is recruiting older people, into the education profession. So people who are career changers, people who've done something else, are proud of whatever it is they might have achieved elsewhere, and are now thinking they've reached a stage where they want to do something different, they want to do something useful, they want to learn something, they want to give back, and so on. So we've recruited so far 350 new teachers who are all kind of done all kinds of other interesting things first. So that's the kind of perspective I guess I come at it from, because of course that's the other stage of our life when we typically want some flexible or part-time working, apart from the bit I'm in at the minute with 2 4-year-olds and a baby, where you want it for that reason. Often you're in that caring sandwich generation where you've got younger children, older parents, all sorts of complicated stuff, as well as perhaps health, and also just other interests, other things that you want to do. And so what's been fascinating about Now Teach, having started off as a teacher and now doing Now Teach, is how it is to see the teaching profession from the outside in, if you see what I mean, from people who've done all kinds of other things, how they see teaching. And of course, it is frustrating, but I think in regard to so many other professions, teaching is behind the times. Oh, look, there's a small practice. Teaching is...
excuse Austin. Austin's come to join us.
Excellent, hi. Teaching is in some ways behind other professions in terms of flexibility and part-time, for obvious reasons, but also for reasons that I think needn't be there. So one of my hopes, I guess, about Now Teachers is that they might be able to help other women be braver. They've sort of had their own journey and used organisations in their own sector, perhaps like Women Ed, to do that, and they are perhaps a little more thick-skinned, perhaps less of their sort of personal identity depends on making it. And so they will be a little bit braver, I think, in asking questions and challenging things. That's usefully disruptive, I guess, is one of the hopes. So thinking about the pandemic specifically, we at Now Teach, it's mostly been really good. I think that where home actually is has been difficult for people, and we have 2 people trying to move house and struggling and all that kind of stuff, and children and childcare, all the normal things. But broadly, in terms of working with our participants, we used to do a lot of in-person stuff, and we used to worry about the people who couldn't make it for whatever reason. Now sometimes we worry about the people who really, really needed the in-person stuff, but we're finding much bigger attendance at our events and so on. And that's broadly fantastic. It also has happened at a time when we've been expanding regionally, and we were worried about how we would do that. And of course, that's much easier. So broadly for us, I'd say it's been good. Thinking then about lessons learned in the classroom, and as I say, I'm not in the classroom anymore, so this is much more of a kind of what now teachers reflect back to me. I think there have of course been some bad things for women specifically, and if you think of the whole kind of effect on women in the pandemic, it's broadly agreed that it's not been good, and that it's set back things we've all been working for. Women's jobs are 1.8 times more vulnerable than men's. We seem to not be having women's voices in politics promoted so much. We all know it's part-time workers that take the sort of more of the burden. Practical things that have been set back. There's no need this year to file the gender pay gap documents, and so most companies haven't. You know, there are some real structural issues that I think have been problematic for the whole of women, and that of course trickles down into women in schools. One of my fears is that you know, so I think that this is teacher tap survey data, but I think that 15% of men roughly male teachers have a higher earning spouse, whereas about 40% of female teachers have a higher earning spouse. And so one of my anxieties is that if it's part-time, flexible people, whose career will take the hit, I guess. And my fear is that it might sometimes be the women, and that in particular, and thinking back to Fee's powerful talk about women in leadership, that if you are struggling to juggle all the home things that the part-time people we know take the greater burden of, is this the moment that you will be leading into leadership in a school context? And I have some, you know, that feels to me a very real concern, and a slight anxiety too about the fact that I know that the teacher recruitment crisis has probably, on the whole, been quite good for part-time working. You know, it is better to have an economics teacher than who is part-time than none. So heads will take a gamble even if they're not wildly keen. If we get more teachers, will that actually set things back potentially, and they can insist on part-time. On the other hand, there's a lot of good stuff. So as you were saying, Hilary, the whole world is working more flexibly. There are structural, practical things changing in a good way. Part-time rail tickets being discussed, you know, things that are not practical, heating subsidies for if you're working from home. So there may be some things that we can learn. There are certainly things that we can learn. And you think of all the training, all events like this that are now considered sort of much more normal. I think in that sense we've shot forward. And I also think before, if you were going into a school. Okay, I'll talk super fast. If you were going into a school before and your partner, family, friends were going into work, you didn't appreciate quite how different your work perhaps was in a school. Now, if your partner is at home and you're going into school and you're not even allowed to leave, you know, the flexibility issue, I think, is in more acute comparison, and things will, I hope, change. And there are practical things. I will shut up because I've reached the end of my time and timed at least well of all the panel, but I just wanted to echo all the stuff that Hilary was saying. Our trainees they negotiate, they ask, they apply for jobs even if they're not part-time, which is uncomfortable, but then negotiate part-time and go in as though you were the manager with the solution rather than here was what I want, help. But I will be quiet, and apologies for going.
They're really good points, and you know, we could talk for hours on this topic about where we're at, the idea of what flexible working is. Technically, the Netherlands has the highest proportion of flexible working in Europe, and yet it has the biggest gap from women teachers to women in education leadership. So it's how do we create a way of working flexibly to optimize the potential of the staff that we have, so we don't have that attrition. But thank you so much. And last but not least, Lucy.
Hello, hi, thanks for having me so much. And when you're last, you know, you can hear people have said things that you've said before, so I'm going to try not to repeat anything, but if I do, it's just amplifying your message because it's important. So I'm Lucy Rose, and I'm a co-founder of an organisation called Flexible Teacher Talent. I'm going to explain just really briefly how we got into it. So myself, Lindsay Patience, were both new mothers and SLT, and we're frustrated in a system that didn't seem to offer opportunity for doing senior roles more flexibly. And obviously there were examples, people like Emma Turner and other co-headships that were around, but they weren't shouted about, and it wasn't hugely so what we decided to do was to come up with a solution, and we didn't want to become one of the 6,000 women, so that's your stat fee, about how many, age 30 to 39, who leave the profession. And we decided to kind of come up with something and decide that flexible working might be one way to retain those effective teachers. We know the biggest thing that has impact on students in the classroom is having an effective teacher there, so retaining them is really important. We're aware that we're both, you know, straight, white, cis, able-bodied women. So if we're facing barriers, then other people will have been facing these barriers for longer probably, and maybe the barriers are harder to break. So our aim is to get rid of these barriers for everyone. That meant that our kind of day job pre-COVID was sort of threefold really, as well as working in schools. We were working with the DfE and helping with policy. So Lindsay would go with baby Rory, and she would go to the DfE and like have meetings with them there. And then the second thing was that we would work with individuals. So we'd help them and collaborate with sister organisations like the MTPT project, Return to Teach, the Shared Headship Network, to help get individual teachers back in the classroom and working flexibly. And then the final thing was that we work with schools and MATs to help them become more flexible. Now, the biggest barriers pre-COVID were that the onus was always on the individual to make it work. And I totally take aboard everything that Hilary said. I think going with solutions was important, but it was the logistical side. And we had individuals saying to us, you know, I've been going every week and trying to get them to agree that the teaching and learning briefing can be held online, and they just won't come up with a solution. And you think that's laughable now. You know, the flip from pre-lockdown meant that a lot of those tech solutions got solved for us. But before that, it was very much up to the individual to try and solve those things. The second thing, and this is backed up by an ENVA report in 2019, is the biggest barrier to flexible working being introduced or implemented in school is the opinion of the head teacher. So a lot of the time we're trying to convince one person in an organisation that it is, you know, of the benefits of flexible working to their organisation, and that trusting their staff is going to have a huge impact on them. So post-COVID, obviously when we spoke to, the biggest, most helpful question that we asked head teachers pre-lockdown was always actually, don't worry about the logistics. Have you actually asked your staff what they want? And that was kind of, it just seemed to be like a light bulb moment that if you just asked them, you might find that many teachers wouldn't really ask for any flexibility, or maybe they would ask for some, but there would be very small tweaks that leadership could make that would have such a huge difference on the lives of those teachers for whatever reason. And lots of them have been mentioned, you know, mothers, sandwich carers, other interests outside of school. So now post lockdown, head teachers and SLT know their staff so much better. You know, Hilary mentioned they've been in our homes, they've been in our lives, that was in a way that was kind of unheard of before. And so we just are kind of 4 things for head teachers post-COVID is that the first thing is you have to trust your staff, you know, and hopefully that's something that we've all learnt. The second thing is to ask them what they want and then react to that. The third is that if there still is a ban on people doing a TLR or SLT and being unable to be flexible, that has to go. That can't exist anymore. You know, head teachers led schools remotely and they did it perfectly well. Presenteeism does not equal, you know, efficacy in a role. And then our schools value the time outside of their contact hours. So if there is still a stigma attached to your staff walking out with the students when they're not needed for anything else, I would question why that is, because that kind of 3:30 to 5 p.m. At the end of a long teaching day, value what your staff can do with that to make themselves more productive later if that's what they choose to do. And the very last thing is to encourage your personalised CPD. So anyone who's having like whole staff CPD in a Wednesday afternoon or whenever it is, that has to go. That can't be something that's like the most productive use of everyone's time. And if it is, let them join it remotely. I'm going to come back on my video now because my sound cut out.
Oh, thank you. You finished. I was about to jump in. Thank you. That was a really lovely way to round up the conversations and the different perspectives that we have. Thank you so much, Lucy. The excuses that we've had in the past, many of those have now gone, and I think it's a chance for us to embrace and move forward as a profession, and to start to think about how can we really work in diverse ways for our communities. Some of the questions that have come up have been around allyship and how women treat women. That's come up in the chat. And I think, and also some of the comments around this being a female issue, but also a male issue, and that we need to have a flexible living approach right across the board. And so there's plenty of opportunity for us to do that. And as school leaders, as a CEO myself, is to model that and to find different representations of both female and male leadership where working is embraced and not seen as some type of less than. So we've got loads of opportunity. Please keep the chat continuing. If you don't mind, panelists, would you mind just staying around? If you're staying around for the whole session, that's brilliant. But if you could stay for a little while, people can continue to chat with you in the discussion chat area. And I am now looking for the fabulous Jules. Where are you, Jules?
Yeah, what a wonderful
I'm 4 minutes over. I failed.
I've just spoken to Women in Germany.
Panelists are amazing. Can I just do a big thank you to them? Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant panel. And yeah, I was just punching the air the whole time because it's been a big thing for me. I mean, I ended up working in an FE college because it was the only way I could do flexible working with my young children, because they were much more flexible. And you know, that seems crazy to me that they lost such a wonderful teacher, you know, the mainstream schools for so long. but you know, so I'm really passionate about it, and I think it will change. And COVID, as Hilary said, COVID is really going to has smashed those myths, hasn't it, completely? Yeah. So thank you, panelists, and thank you, Liz, for chairing that wonderful panel. We are moving over to WomenEd Germany. I think I know we've chatted in the here we go. I think, are you there? I'm talking into the ether. I know you've been here all morning with us, haven't you?
I am.
Ah, lovely to see you. Thank you. I shall hand over straight to you.
Okay.
And like I say, we're 5 minutes over, so don't worry about going over too much. I'll chat to Mira about that too.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
All good.
Excellent. Okay. Oh, there's a typo there on the first page. This is the first time that I'm presenting, and I'm really excited. I'm inspired by one of the colleagues that I work with, Ange Au, who's very active and is always doing amazing things. And it made me 10% braver to watch her do that and to try and engage in the discussion. So can you hear me okay?
Yeah, brilliant.
Okay. I thought I'd start with my own personal story, and that was being born and raised in Australia to migrant parents, and always feeling that there was, that I was missing something, that everyone was so different to me, and yet simultaneously believing that I would always do something really important. So the question that I was asking myself for many, many years was, who did I think I was? And probably from a young age, thinking, you know, I'm an imposter. So that's what inspired the title for the presentation, and that is, will the real leader please stand up? So if we look to the mission of WomenEd, and that's supporting women to take more steps in being braver, this is what I'd like us to consider in the session today, looking at what is imposter syndrome or imposter feeling, the importance of resilience, reconceptualizing leadership, the power of asking, and being deliberate in our learning. So I'm sure many of you have experienced this, and often we talk about it with women and sometimes with men, but not as often as we do with women. And I'm not sure how many men experience this, and if they do, they certainly mask it really well. Have you ever felt like you're pretending to be someone else at work? And if so, who? So I liked this image here because it really defines who might experience imposter syndrome, and that could be anyone and at any point in their lives. So originated in the 70s when two women were looking at studying confidence in professional women and noticed that there was this idea around feeling as if they weren't really doing their jobs, that they were somehow limited. I won't read those statistics to you, but they're there for later. Imposter feeling is probably a nicer way of thinking about it, because imposter syndrome has different connotations, but we're talking about the same thing here. And so what does this feel like? It's comparison. It's looking at others and saying, wow, they did that really well. Maybe I didn't. It's the inner critic, that constant voice that asks, who are you to do this? Charge that, lead this. They're temporary but limiting beliefs around expectations from others, stressful workplaces, mistakes, and unnecessary worry. And there's a quote here from a leadership coach in Silicon Valley who says that these are cognitive distortions in our heads, and we deflect responsibility by just saying, I got lucky, it was a fluke, that really wasn't because of me. This is an interesting image again, public self. That's what it might look like on the outside, but really what we're saying to ourselves is, this is really hard and it's crushing me. Gaping Void have lots of great images. So, if we're looking at making that internal limiting voice quiet, I think we need to remind ourselves of certain things. And one of them is that we don't need to know it all, even as leaders, that we're enough right now. And that because each of us is unique, there aren't any templates for how we can and should be successful. That instead of using that cognitive space to worry, we should instead be building our resilience and redefining what we would like to be. Currently reading Eleanor Aguilar's Onward book, which is a month-by-month study of emotional resilience in educators. And she talks about the 3 necessary conversations that we need to have in schools, but that the first one needs to be about individual resilience before we can tackle any organizational or systemic conditions. And so really that's what I will keep referring back to, that in order for us to go out and make change, that we need to be strong ourselves first. This is also from her book, and just some ideas around resilience. I'll just let you look at that for a moment. Okay, now I'll just reference a few authors that I think have made some great points about what we can do to move forward. And I think the question that resonated with me most in this book was, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And she lists some ideas like make a big bet, be bold, take risks, all the things that we know, make failure matter, reach beyond your bubble, and let urgency conquer fear, which I think is an interesting one to think about. Another interesting author who says some amazing things about redefining how we see ourselves before we can go out and make change. And she says, shame makes us freeze and try to get really small and invisible. whereas pleasure invites us to move, to open, to grow. And I think the next one is even more important. It says everyone doesn't have to be the same kind of person. And I think in terms of leadership, that will look different for each and every one of us. And I think sometimes we might become stuck in our thinking and try and be the kind of leader that we think others might want to have. She goes on to say more about self-talk. The less I engage in gossip, the less I harbour suspicion, the more space I find within myself for miraculous experiences. And I think that that's a powerful statement. And when imposter syndrome says, what do you know? We can answer a lot. I pay attention. So Adrienne Marie Brown has some great ideas there. If you have a chance, look at her book. It's well worth it. These are some of the principles that she uses in her book. And I think less prep, more presence, I think is really important given the lockdown period we've all been in. There's been a lot of anxiety around preparation, and there should be more attention paid to being present so that we can have conversations that really matter, that really develop trust, and that enable meaningful conversation to happen. Of course, Wheatley has some really important things to say about leadership. And she talks about this core concept of relationships being critical, that chaos is essential and that we need to be able to adapt. I won't read the rest of that to you, but I just wanted to share some of her ideas in the slide. This is an interesting text that I came across that really tries to redefine how we're seeing ourselves, that too many of the choices we make are small and safe, that we should be trusting our ideas. And again, something that's come up in the presentations this morning, and that's learning how to appoint yourself. Again, one of the ideas that has been presented already, and that's finding a network of people who can encourage you and who will remind you of what you've accomplished rather than buying into those limiting thoughts. Finding a coach or a community like this one, I think that these support mechanisms are really important, especially when we're trying to build change. I think that the work of these two authors in one of their texts called Tell Me So I Can Hear You is really important, because when we're developing ourselves and our leadership capacity, it's really important to work out how feedback is received by others and what kind of feedback really works for ourselves. So they talk about these 4 levels and they really get into the fine detail about who we are and therefore how we like to receive feedback. And I think it's really useful for those that are developing teams, because you can see some of your faculty members here that some of them are at a place where they just want to be told what's next, versus someone who might be self-transforming and who is really looking at a deeper level of reflection. So I think that that's a useful way of thinking about feedback. And there's another one here, which just defines how feedback is received by different people depending on where they are with their thinking and their growth. I think a lot of people would like to be seeing themselves as self-transforming, and sometimes that's hard, but I think ultimately the goal is for all of us to get there and to help our teams get there also, but they need to be willing to do that. Okay, so they talk about these 4 ways of feedback and how they can work, and in the red font really is the essence of each of those levels. So someone who is an instrumental knower, likes feedback, which tells them what they need to do. And at a socializing level, I need to feel valued. At the next level, it's let me demonstrate competency. And then the last one is we can figure this out together. So I think that that might be a useful framework. If you haven't seen their work, I think it's worth looking at. Now, I'm sure some of you who are active on Twitter see Austin Kleon. He's written a few books, and I think one of the key ideas is that he writes because there isn't anything that he likes to read, so he just does that himself. And I think that that message has been clear here today in the conference, that if we don't have what we need, then we need to create it, because the chances are that someone else needs that also. So what we need is to be able to say what we need. And Amanda Palmer is well known for that. Her book, The Art of Asking, is all about being open to ask for help and to tell others what you need, because you will be probably quite surprised at how many people are willing to give. But if we don't ask, we won't ever know that. So she talks about the fear of the no that keeps so many of us quiet. She also says we often resist asking, not only because we're afraid of rejection, but also because we don't even think we deserve what we're asking for. And so again, that idea of the imposter feeling, that we may not be worthwhile in the roles that we are, in the help that we're seeking, in what we're trying to achieve. So that leads me to my question, will the real leader please stand up? If I had to articulate what an exemplary leader would be, I would have trouble, because I think over the last 6 months, our ideas about leadership have been redefined. And even if we are leaders, how do we know we're becoming more effective? Are we mirrors for each other? Do we need evidence for that? These are all the questions that I have, that I bring with me today to this presentation. And then if the work of leaders is to transform themselves, then is it our work also to help others do the same? How am I going for time?
Oh, you're doing great.
Okay.
Started a little bit late, so a couple more minutes, if that's okay.
Sure. Keegan and Lahi also talk about this idea of a deliberately developmental organisation, which I think is useful for those that work in schools, because schools are learning institutions, and so we need to see that in our teachers and in everyone who's there. So there was an interesting quote that that they use, where maybe it's not on that page. Here we are. So once we've mastered something, we're usually commended for that, and then we become reliable and dependable. And that means that we're kept in that place, and that growth then becomes unlikely for us. So deliberately developmental organizations stir things up, and they trouble the waters. They want people to be constantly moving. And I think that as leaders, that's our challenge, that we don't keep people in places that once you've mastered something, then that means you move on and you let someone else fill that space. I think that's a really useful idea. Again, Wheatley, she says we cannot hope to make sense using our old maps. I think that that's been really clear today, that the last 6 months has shown how flexible we all are and have had to be, but that opens up possibilities for us so much more now. Again, Wheatley, it is possible to prepare for the future without knowing what it will be. The primary way to prepare for the unknowns is to attend to the quality of our relationships, to how well we know each other and trust one another. And that's evident here in this conference this weekend with all the sharing. Being open to new plans, ones that we hadn't considered previously, like flexible living. Leadership is change and there's nothing else. And I think most people would agree with that. And of course, Brene Brown, armor is not necessary or rewarded. Okay, and I have a list of references there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That was fascinating. A lot of that resonated with me. So you're giving me a good kick. Metaphorically, obviously. Thank you very much. And it's lovely to have Women in Germany here.
Pleasure.
As part of the Global Unconference. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, and thank you for joining us. We are moving to Mira. I know Mira's there.
Hello.
Hi, Mira. I'll let you just get straight on.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try and share my screen and get all technical. So please
stay
bear with me if
while you're doing that. Should be okay to do. So might just take a little bit of a few minutes. And Mira's going to talk about, let's dive into our histories, which I'm really excited to hear. Yeah, that looks great. That?
Yep. Oh, excellent. Okay, that's wonderful. I think so. I'm taking the approach of being a complete reflective practitioner and taking some time today to really allow others to take away some food for thought in looking at how our personal identities and our kind of personal the elements that make us who we are, but also our professional identities, and where's the melting pot for that really. And I guess it's really linking up with all the lovely things I've been hearing today and kind of allowing everyone to take a step back and see how wonderful they are in what they do and in the roles that they are playing, but also trying to ground it in some sort of way in the things that I have read and also the people that I've met along the way, and hopefully try and find some problems, some solutions to not find some problems, but also find some solutions to problems along the way that I've kind of, maybe nothing too novel, kind of reiterating what people have said today. So I'll kickstart it off. My name is Mira Chudasama, and I thought I would share who I am through some symbols. So trying to give you a little bit of background on who I am and how this topic really came about for me. I began thinking about my own identity after my first degree in media at Nottingham Trent, and looking at Indian women, especially within Britain, and a part of that for me was really understanding. When I started thinking about this presentation, I really wanted to think about all the different roles that I play. So I'm the daughter-in-law, a wife, a teacher trainer, a research lead, an editor, a master's graduate, and lots of hats that we kind of take on through the course of our life. And out of these roles, which ones did I feel the most confident in, but also the ones that challenged me, I think was something that I had to really, it's a question that I'm constantly kind of thinking about at the moment recently. And I think it's a really interesting one, listening to lots of people today, that actually this is a common thread. It's a common thing that we're all kind of thinking, and how do we manage these roles in our lives. So a part of these symbols are, I guess, a part of our representation, and I'll have a think about that in a moment, where we kind of represent a particular self to the outside world, and actually how much of that is really a true representation of the things that we're kind of going through, or the things that we want to share with the world. And I think it's really important to understand that from myself, I come from a Gujarati background, so that's a western state of India. I'm a byproduct of colonialism, in which my family and my heritage is from an East African Indian family, so that migrant family mentality has really translated for me during the course of my life. And I think that's something that I hadn't really anticipated, or didn't really think had much impact, but actually I think it has had an impact. And how much of that has had a role in how much of that has had a role in my own professional identity is something that I'm starting to really consider more so as I move forward in my role as an editor of Innovate Journal, but also my role as an English teacher, as well as thinking about areas of my teaching practice as being a young British Indian female teaching English. I think I've had some very strange experiences. One of which prior to training was, oh, can I really teach English? And I was like, I think through the course of my PGCE and building up on my subject knowledge, I feel very, very well equipped to teach English, but also feeling very questioned under my appearance, my representation. I represent, from just my physical features, a British Indian woman, but actually that came under question into my professional role. And that really gave me some food for thought as I started my career in teaching. So I guess a starting point for me has always been with Stuart Hall, and as somebody that I hold really fondly, especially in that first year of study. I'll leave it on the slide for a couple of minutes just to take in. I guess with Stuart Hall, what I really love about this is that the fact that we are always in a process, and that there is a constant sense of production. Maybe the things I've presented today will only last, in the temporary element in the next 20 minutes, but actually we'll all be developing in some sort of way as we move forward. And in considering who we are, I thought I'd do a little professional versus personal fact file, things that I think are probably crossovers, but areas that I think are particularly quite interesting. So I guess in my personal life, I hold family, relationships and education as really quite highly in my life. But as well as seeing that actually the people in my life that have allowed me to progress quite well, and being from a migrant family, this element of resilience that I never really thought I just innately had, but actually I think it's from the environment that I've been around, especially from my parents and my grandparents. And this has influenced the way that I kind of approach the professional world. When I was going into teaching, I didn't have many of those personal networks, but actually I really yearned for those professional networks as a support mechanism as to moving forward. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on when we start to consider who can be a part of that professional network. Reputation was a big thing in where we are in Milton Keynes. I think there's a lot of people teachers who know each other very well, but also building on that and allowing a good reputation to kind of hold fire in meeting new people and knowing that actually there are opportunities just outside of your school and outside of your role, which I'll talk about a little bit more in light of my role as editor of Innovate Journal. I found that I became very determined when not taking the no, and if somebody says no to me, I'd be like, okay, there's another way of finding an opportunity in this. And you'll notice that in a minute when I talk about my SWOT analysis on myself. Having a really strong work ethic came from, I guess, my mum and dad, my parents, and understanding that actually the hard work they had achieved in just coming here was something that they had taken to a certain level, and now it was my job to take it even further. The level of independence that I guess as we as women have learned to kind of just get on with, and being independent. For me, it stems from being, I guess, an only child, in which kind of being left to your own devices to kind of think about some of the ways that you can develop as an individual. I have to do a small plug here on Susan Cain's book, Quiet, that talks about the role of introverts in society and how that actually, I do class myself as an introvert, so this for me is quite a strange thing, but I do really enjoy speaking too. So what would you feature in your personal and professional identity fact file? And I guess it'd be really lovely at some point if people shared this on Twitter or kind of engaged with this at some point, things that I think make up who you are in your personal lives and your professional worlds. But is there any crossover there and any links that you can be making? I think is a really lovely thing to start thinking about. Moving forward, acknowledging where your strengths and weaknesses come from. When I stepped back to do this presentation, I think I started to consider the elements of where my strengths and weaknesses were arising from was actually from areas in my upbringing, experience that I had during teaching in my early career as a trainee, now as a teacher trainer, and really trying to pick apart some of those areas. So I'm going to share, I would love for people to share their own SWOT analysis on themselves at some point. And there's not very much a discussion base, but I would love people to kind of share kind of areas of what makes who they are and areas that they think are particular threats that they have in moving forward and progressing in their careers, opportunities that are available. And I think doing this sometimes really gives us a little bit of scope, an element to stepping back and giving us a bit more clarity in moving forward. So when I did this on myself, I felt that actually I can work well with people, but also I can work really well on my own. I felt very open to learn new things and always being a learner. I think I feel very much comfortable in the classroom to say, actually, okay, I'm not too familiar with that area, I'm not really familiar with that topic, but actually I'm very open to learn. Getting very determined and quite relentless. With Innovate Journal, I became a one-woman band in creating, graphic designing, disseminating, networking, and being relentless in making it successful, because I felt there was a need for teachers to research and to share the lovely things that we do constantly in the classroom, and that research can be and will be accessible to every teacher. So that was my mission there, and I became relentless at it. So that was, I think, a big part of a strength of mine, because it is now growing. I love to manage more than one project and kind of living in an element of chaos. And I think what I've noticed today is the fantastic women that have presented, that we all kind of live in some element of chaos, but I've really thrived in living in that chaos, but also having that kind of pragmatic, logical stance and taking things in a step-by-step fashion. As much as there are loads of strengths to our wonderful beings, there are also elements I think sometimes come quite naturally as being a teacher, being quite self-critical, feeling guilty if you don't feel like you've accomplished what you wanted to in the day, sometimes getting too emotionally attached to projects maybe, and there are many more weaknesses I feel. But I think what I've really understood is from today actually is that kind of seeing lessons in the failures of our day-to-day. Looking at our opportunities and the threats now moving forward. Opportunities, the amount of opportunities on Twitter are unbelievable, and I really found networking with people like with WomenEd, Chartered College, BAME Ed. I think there's so many fantastic ways of meeting new people and learning from people around us, and I think that's something to be taken away. And the internet is filled with opportunities, and I think we probably don't utilise the internet, well, I definitely don't utilise the internet enough. Seeing some of the threats in moving forward and progressing in careers, I think I have an inability to delegate. I really want to have a hand on everything, and actually I have to learn to kind of let go of some of those elements, especially within teaching, but also as a teacher trainer, as a research lead, but also as an editor, and learning to say, trusting others and building those trusting relationships. Having that work-life balance and saying sometimes, not right now, I think is really important to keep yourselves feeling healthy. Time sometimes can be a threat, not having enough hours in the day to complete everything, but I think having that pragmatic, logical stance has really helped me, and I'm sure other people have many other ways of organising their time, which would be lovely to kind of understand and share. And sometimes a lack of support, I think, as much as I can really push for ideas, I think being a young Gujarati British Indian woman has had many kind of hindrances actually, as much as it's been beautiful, but actually it's been very difficult trying to get doors opened. But finding that support on Twitter and finding like-minded women and men who are really willing to kind of back you, I think has been fantastic, and it's really lovely to see. I would love for people to be able to step back on us on today and kind of do a quick strengths, weaknesses and opportunities and threats as a way to kind of step back and think about where you are currently and where you would like to go in the future. So in what way can we use our personal histories, experiences and stories to support who we are as professionals? I began to think about this question really more as a teacher in the classroom, where I started to feel a bit more open in thinking about my own personal stories and how students felt really bit more open in kind of considering who they were as individuals when I started to open up, not to ever go past that professional boundary, but also to acknowledge that we all have backgrounds, we all have different things that make us who we are, but actually these are really important ways of forming communities. As much as I may have not felt that community when I was growing up, but actually I've really enjoyed creating classroom communities within my own space within the school that I'm currently in, and finding professionals within the spaces that I'm in that can be a part of building this fantastic community around us, WomenEd being one of them. So finding some of the solutions to problems that I've kind of faced, I guess, is a really big part of this talk. And I thought about some of the problems that I faced, but also find some of the solutions to those problems. And I'm sure there are many more solutions that I haven't yet considered, and I would love to know more about them as we move forward. So last of all, just thinking about those, some of the solutions. early on in my career that I felt that I was too young to grow into roles that were pitched beyond me, and I was relentless in trying to attain research lead role at quite early on in my career. There was a question of how will you be able to do this? How will you be able to grow your research lead? How will you be able to grow Innovate Journal so that you're networking on an international level? And I understood that it took a very logical approach to it. Talking to other people, networking, finding people who are also passionate about research or teacher training, I think is really helpful. Having not enough knowledge in the field, I think very much so. I've always questioned my own knowledge base. I did a media degree at Nottingham Trent and then went into English teaching and trained at the IOE. And I didn't feel like I had enough knowledge to become an English teacher, but actually thinking and learning that along the way and knowing that it will take time. And I had the passion to learn and the enthusiasm to learn, and that was more than enough. And investigating those people around me, investigating areas that I could be better in, learning. Okay, doing my master's in teaching was really lovely as well, and getting educated, as it was spoken by Deb this morning. The lack of support, and I guess that kind of comes into the schools I was kind of operating in early on, but also learning that actually support can come from many different places, and relying or depending on others isn't a sign of weakness, but also is a way of building that network around you that to kind of provide that support system in allowing you to move forward. And if you haven't found it yet, just to keep searching. There's so many fantastic networks on Twitter, as well as Facebook, as well as Instagram, so many platforms that are now available, and really searching for those. And I did a lot of that during lockdown, just searching for those networks. I guess it's probably a bit problematic for me to put my cultural heritage under the problem section, but feeling that my cultural heritage was under question, I found that very hard to face. Even nowadays, kind of in my personal time, it's very difficult to understand people's questions onto who I am or where do I come from. Whereas Ahmed always kind of has he has a poem on that, and I think it resonates with me really well. But using that to as a showcase of actually, yes, this is my heritage, but all the lovely things I am now and all the lovely accomplishments and achievements have come from this heritage. Actually, that my upbringing, my past, the past of my parents and my grandparents provide me with the skills and the tools to carry me forward in growing my networks and growing a really strong career for myself moving forward. And I think that's something that I would love people to take away, that kind of doing a personal investigation is always quite sometimes difficult because you can't always pinpoint it, but it's really worthy because you've kind of learnt these beautiful things along the way, and that really does have an impact on your professional careers. And I think that's where I'd like to probably leave it. I think I've zoomed past it quite well, but I've met my time for 12:10. So I think hopefully there's some little bits that we can take away from there, hopefully.
Mira, thank you. Yeah, you've done really well on time, so that's just perfect, and I love that. I feel slightly scared about the idea of doing a SWOT analysis on myself. That's it's a cold sweat. But, I love the personal investigation, and you're so right about that cultural heritage. You talking about that really reminded me of Samina Chowdhury, Equitable Ed, because she always talks about the value of cultural heritage and the depth, and I really love hearing women being proud of that and using it, like you say, for knowledge, experiencing and network. So that's just been brilliant. Such a positive look at yourself and all your different areas of life. It's brilliant. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Do I just stop share now? Should I just do it?
Stop share, then we'll go back into the screens, and then we should have, there's Emily all there ready. It's amazing. We've gone from Germany to Southeast England with Mira, and now Czechoslovakia with Emily Rankin. So how fantastic. So yeah, thank you, Mira. We'll I'm sure we will speak again on Twitter. Good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I shall just pass over to you, Emily.
Great, thank you, Jules. And thanks, Mira, for your reflection. It was really meaningful and authentic and insightful. It was so personal. I really enjoyed listening to it. So what an amazing weekend that it's been. It's really intimidating actually to follow all of these incredible sessions. I learned so much, but it's been great. And here I am with my session called Sharing the Toolbox, Equipping Women to Access Leadership Roles. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. There we are. Is it working, everybody? I hope so. All right, so I'll dive in. Okay, so I'm Emily Rankin, and I'm a deputy head and an English teacher at the English College in Prague, Czech Republic. I'm also the regional lead for WomenEdTech, and I've been a lot of things in the past. I'm a former head of English, former exams coordinator, IB coordinator, assistant head, former journalist as well, and I'm also a mom. My husband and I are in the process of adopting our second child, so it's been really great to connect with so many women this weekend and hear experiences that are so similar and feel just that collegiality. The thing that really led me to, there we go. The thing that really led me to putting this session together was the fact that I'm in a superintendency course right now. I'm pursuing my superintendent's license, and that's kind of like a director or CEO position equivalent in the UK. And I'm doing that through a university in the US. And it's kind of interesting because only about 21% of superintendents in schools in America are female. And in the state of Minnesota, where I'm attending university, only 8% of licensed superintendents who are female are practicing. So it's, yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, but I'm being mentored by 2 women through this program who are incredible, one in Minnesota, one in Belgium. And I've learned so much, and I'm hoping that they've shared their toolbox with me and I can share it with you as well. All right, so to get an idea of who is in this session right now, it would be nice to know kind of maybe who's serving in leadership positions and is willing to share their toolbox, or also maybe people that are thinking about going into leadership. Let's see. That are going into leadership. And what I'm going to have you do is take 20 seconds to enter your position into the chat box, but don't press enter until I say go, so we can kind of get a waterfall of ideas to see who all is attending this session. So 20 seconds starting now, type in your position. Okay, about 10 more seconds. Okay, and go. Wow, that is, gosh, we have senior teachers, assistant heads, people involved in leadership development, principals, country leaders, subject leaders, all kinds of things. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. So hopefully you'll be able to take something away from this session that equips your toolbox or allows you to share it with somebody else. Thank you very much. All right, so in the next 18 minutes, I'm going to touch on the research to practice gap in the recruitment and hiring process of educational leadership. I'm also going to look at some different tools for assessing our workplaces, getting and giving exposure to ourselves, championing ourselves and others, and also advocating for people that are around us. All right, so the first research to practice gap. Now, I read about this recently, that back in 1601, experiments were done to see if lemon juice could prevent scurvy in sailors. And it was found that it did, and it was published widely in academic and medical journals at the time. However, it wasn't until 1795 that the British Royal Navy actually required that sailors be given regular intervals of lemon juice in order to prevent scurvy, and millions of people died from it in the process. So that's a 194-year research to practice gap. We also have a research to practice gap in school recruitment and hiring processes, and I hope to God that it is not as extensive as this one, obviously, because it's so important. So here is a bit of a diagram that shows or outlines traditional recruitment and hiring. All right, so as we can see, schools advertise a post, we're hiring, when they have a vacancy, and then they vet the CVs, they look through them, create a list of finalists, they go ahead and conduct the interviews, and then finally they have the finalists, the final finalists visit the schoolhouse if possible, and then they make a decision. And this is problematic because it really only casts a narrow net. Oftentimes, who gets chosen for an interview is based on kind of a who you know sort of scenario. Biases are often left unchecked. This sort of a model lacks a needs analysis to find out really what you need from the position prior to hiring for it. And also, it allows for that stereotypical strong voice that getting the gig oftentimes. So what the recent research tells us is that actually, this is how recruitment and hiring should take place. So when you know that you have a vacancy to fill, right away from day one, you go on your calendar and you plan to fill it, but you're doing a lot of preparation. And you assemble stakeholders in this position and you say, all right, so let's conduct a needs analysis. What are our priorities for this specific post? And what do we want to do with this job? Do we want to keep it the same? Do we want to adjust the job advert when we post it? And then when those decisions are made, then you announce that you're hiring. And a lot of schools obviously advertise on their websites. Obviously the tests, great places to advertise, but really if you want to diversify your hiring pool, you've got to reach out to different organizations and networks to get a bigger pool of talent. Go on social media. I hear people say, well, our school leadership isn't very diverse because we just don't have candidates applying. Well, go out there and find those candidates, find those organizations, get that pool bigger. All right, also, schools should be assembling their hiring panel, and that panel should be trained for unconscious bias, and they should have a rubric created for standardized questions to have when they conduct the interview. And then of course they go ahead and look through the CVs, but they do it in a way that's a blind look through. So they're vetting candidates based on you know, what experiences they've had, what they see in the CVs, and not really judging them maybe on the name they see or clues that allude to gender, ethnicity, or something like that. And then conducting the interviews happens next. And like I said, there should be some sort of a rubric or a template with standardized questions for conducting the interviews so that we know that decisions are being made based on data and metrics rather than emotion. So that strong voice doesn't kind of just get the gig because they're charismatic, for example. And then of course we have the visit to the schoolhouse if possible for the finalists, and then hiring the post. So this should help us to get a more diverse group of people into school leadership. And according to McKinsey & Company, a research organization, we have made slow but steady progress in this area when organizations do follow this model. However, the broken rung is still holding women back. And that's the rung that says, all right, people are getting into entry-level positions, but they're just not making it up the next rung for whatever reason, because they aren't given the opportunities to enhance their CVs, or they're not connecting with the right people who will give them a leg up, for example. And also, now the COVID-19 crisis could erase all of the gains that we've made, according to McKinsey & Company. And this is really critical. So certain challenges are more likely to push women out of the workforce, such as a lack of flexibility at work. We've heard a lot about flexible working and living from our panelists earlier today. Women feeling like they always need to be on in all hours. Worry perhaps that their performance is being negatively judged because of the caregiving or other responsibilities they have during the pandemic. Or perhaps another challenge is discomfort sharing the challenges that they are facing with teammates or their managers because they don't want to be deemed less capable or less competent. So now more than ever during this time of COVID, we really do need to get those tools into patching up that rung and building a solid foundation for ourselves and our fellow women, especially our BAME colleagues and peers, to be able to climb that ladder. All right, so now I'm going to run through a list of tools that can hopefully help us do that. All right, so firstly, in kind of a larger, bigger picture sense, I have some questions here, and they are from gov.uk's report, Work to Understand the Gender Pay Gap. But I would argue that really you can pose these questions not only about gender, but also about race and ethnicity. So bigger picture view, we can assess our workplaces, we can look really hard about the structures in our organizations, and we can ask ourselves, do certain people get stuck at certain levels in our schoolhouses? Is there a gender or an ethnic imbalance in promotions? Are certain people more likely to be recruited into lower paid roles? I think Natasha was saying either on Friday or Saturday that she noticed that in her school, a lot of the support staff were BAME colleagues. And, you know, when you're talking about representation or the ability to access different areas, you know, within their workplace journey, I mean, that's very telling. Also, do men and women or other groups of people leave us at the same rates? Now, if you're a leader in a school, you can ask these questions. And if you're not in senior leadership, I think you can still ask these questions in your school. You can think about this. You can have those courageous conversations with people in your workplace as well. All right. Also, do aspects of pay differ by gender or differ by groups of people? Are different people judged in the same way at work? Evaluation is definitely something to look at. Do we support part-time employees' opportunities to progress? Again, we're touching on that flexible working piece that we explored a lot today. And also, do we support men and women to take on caring responsibilities? And this is a big question during, again, this pandemic. All right. I really like this quote from Claudia Brindwoody. She is the vice president of IBM and also an LGBTQ activist, all right? And she says, inclusivity means not just we're allowed to be there, but we are valued. I've always said smart teams will do amazing things, but truly diverse teams will do impossible things. I think that's a great quote for your toolbox. All right. So additional tools. We can get exposure for ourselves and we can give it to other people as well. So let's start turning the screws of celebrating what other people do and what we do as well. So shadowing opportunities are an excellent tool. We have these at my school where people can sit in on certain meetings or maybe do an inbox task or just shadow a position that they're interested in. And mock interviews or situations like an inbox task, for example, are really powerful. I have a colleague named Helen, and she 2 years ago went through a series of mock interviews for a faux deputy head pastoral position with our chair of governors, and she found it to be really valuable. So you can ask to take part in those, or you can be willing to lead them for other people. Pitching ideas and carrying them out, of course, is a powerful thing to do when you want to maybe ramp up your CV or even get more experience in a certain area. We had a couple of guys in our school pitch the idea of a problem-solving day to get different year groups working together collaboratively within houses. And they pitched it, and SLT approved it and said, all right, we'll back you on it, we'll help you plan it, and they got to carry it out. And I think it was a great learning experience for everybody, especially the students. Of course, you can be engaged with mentoring and coaching arrangements. So you can serve as a mentor, or you can offer to be one to someone else as well. Like I said, I have two incredible mentors right now that, again, gave me the idea for this particular topic. And I'm so grateful to them. And through the WomenEd organization as well, I've connected with so many really remarkable women that have allowed me to gain so much exposure within leadership, especially. You can invite people to network with you if you have access to a specific network that is beneficial. Of course, you can celebrate successes publicly. That's really huge. And we're terrible at doing that, especially a lot of us. I don't know why, but I know I have a hard time tweeting about something, you know, if I'm successful, but I shouldn't be, and I should be putting it on LinkedIn, and I should be padding my resume with it. And I really try to make it a point as well when I see other women doing incredible things of celebrating them too, and making sure that people know about it, of making sure their work and successes are acknowledged. All right, presenting and writing are ways that we can reflect on what we know or share it with others. And also, of course, connecting with Women Ed is an incredible way to get and give exposure to people that are on their leadership journey. All right, so in terms of kind of daily things we can do, so not the big picture structural items, but just little tiny things, we can challenge interruption in meetings, which if you are a woman and you've sat in a meeting, you've been interrupted much more than your male counterparts. I like this quote: although bias itself is devilishly hard to eliminate, it is not as difficult to interrupt. So interrupt that bias. Also, make sure women get credit for their ideas. And if you're in leadership, set up a rotation for office housework or less popular tasks, and don't ask for volunteers, because again, research shows us that women tend to do the volunteering for a lot of the smaller, more low profile tasks. I know that personally, early on in my career, I was often the person that raised their hand and said, I'll do it, because I had time and I could. But I noticed when I was an early career teacher and doing that all the time, that my duties kept kind of expanding because I was reliable and competent, I guess, but I didn't necessarily have a title or any sort of pay compensation to go with that. So we need to guard women from becoming that, and make sure that they have high profile things they can be involved with, high value projects, and that also they're not just being allowed, even if they're volunteering, to do just office housework all the time, the data bits or the emailing home to parents about the little things, or whatever. It needs to be spread. All right. Additionally, ways to saw into the misogynistic workplace. Some things we can do on a daily level are asking people to have a voice in meetings if their voices aren't being heard. It's really hard to have a voice in certain settings, especially when you're from a marginalized group. So being an advocate for someone who doesn't feel comfortable speaking up speaks volumes, I guess you could say. All right, we can also acknowledge the importance of lower profile contributions. I was just talking about how oftentimes women are the ones doing the lower profile contributions. That's what research tells us. And responding to double standards. Now, I just learned these terms not too long ago, bro-creating and whip eating, and that involves crediting women with ideas. So if you are in a meeting or a setting and a woman has an idea and then a few minutes later it's restated by someone else, you make sure to speak up and say, actually, I think Lisa's idea was incredible as well. I'm so glad you liked it too. Yes, let's bring it forward. And giving that attribution, so credit is given where it's due. And also scheduling meetings inclusively. Now, Samina was talking either Friday or Saturday about the fact that she is Muslim, and there's a workplace culture where people will say, oh, it's the end of the week and we need to meet about this thing, but let's just do it over happy hour. Let's do it over a beer in the pub. And Samina said, I'm Muslim, I don't drink. It's not something that I'm comfortable with. So we should make sure that wherever we are having meetings or making decisions, we're doing them in places that people feel comfortable and that they're accessible, that they're during times of day when people can go to them, and they're not eating into other commitments that people have outside of work. Again, I'm repeating a lot of what's been said in sessions all throughout the weekend. All right, so here's another quote from Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a very strong voice in the US right now. And she says that justice is about making sure that being polite is not the same thing as being quiet. In fact, oftentimes the most righteous thing you can do is shake the table. So we need to interrupt bias. We have a moral imperative to do so. And so we need to be using the tools to fix those wrongs, to build firm foundations for ourselves and others, and getting involved. All right, so the final sort of tool that I will talk about in terms of what we can do to create pathways to opportunities for leadership is that we can just advocate in a general sense. Now, a lot of women throughout this weekend have already given sessions on these things, and they've drilled down quite a lot into them. I'm just giving a very general overview right now. We can champion representation and diversity. We should be doing that. We can offer suggestions for improved recruitment and hiring, like I showed in my initial slides. We can weigh in on how evaluation is done in our schools, because we've seen that women, especially women in leadership, tend to get evaluated in a more negative way. We can promote flexible working practices. We can fight the gender pay gap. We can serve as mentors for others, and we can challenge the likability penalty, which means that women are penalized for exhibiting traits that are considered male in leadership, oftentimes like decisiveness or assertiveness. So if women are seen negatively for being decisive or assertive, we challenge that. All right. If you have more ideas, add them in the chat and I will stick them in the Padlet I'm about to share with you. But I'm almost to the end of my session right now. So much of this is a summary of points, like I said, that have been broached all weekend. So it was kind of coincidental that my session is right now towards the end of the unconference. I hope you've been able to either take a tool from this toolbox or think about ways that you can share from yours. So we can not only fix those rungs, those broken rungs on the pathway to leadership opportunities, but also so that we can build a firm foundation of equity and workplaces that are forward-thinking and inclusive. And I have a little QR code up here, and in that QR code, you're led to a Padlet that has all of the different resources I used for this presentation, as well as the different lists and things like that. Thank you so much for having me. It's just a pleasure to be part of all of this. Yay, Women Ed. Have a great day.
Emily, thank you so much. That was brilliant. I've sort of taken pictures of nearly every slide because so many brilliant ideas. I love the idea you're being mentored by somebody, where was it, in Minnesota?
Yeah, Matamida, Minnesota. I have a female superintendent. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then did you say in Belgium as well?
Yep, at a Department of Defense school in Belgium. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, amazing. That's brilliant. That's made me think about where we can get our coaches and mentors on this global forum now that we can do that. So that's brilliant. Thank you. Oh, and it was lovely to have, very fitting to have you as the last one, because it did feel like you were almost summarising the whole unconference with those ideas of disruption and disrupting bias. So thank you for that. I'm a bit sad seeing in Prague, because we were supposed to go to Prague, weren't we, Kezia, for Kezia's birthday, and it's all been cancelled. So we'll come another year, though. We'll come for 101st.
Please do.
Rude.
I know. Well, you did once announce that I was 70 on Twitter on my birthday, so it was payback.
I think how many people actually believed it, though, Jules?
I know. Tell me about it. Right, we have our final presentation. I'm absolutely fearful because also everyone's done so well with sharing their screens, and so now I'm like, oh, I'm WomenEdTech and I won't be able to, but I think I can. So if I can just get to sharing it, here we go. This is something that we do as a final bit. It's a sort of a small end to our unconference, and we've done it right from the first year. If you don't know this hashtag, gendered cheese, I'll give you a little bit of background about it, but many of you will know it. And it started off with this middle picture here of the cheese where it was gendered. And I was having some conversations with somebody that had put this picture up, and it was ridiculous. And I remember I spent the day, I was painting with my toddlers at the time, and I spent the day painting bananas in pink and blue. So that's where gender cheese came from. And as you can see, this I hate my thighs and I'm super on the right there is an old picture that I've used right from the beginning, but this is a new one. I love boobies like my daddy, and I'm not allowed to date ever. So that's where gender cheese came from. But what we've always done with Women Ed is shown how these images affect us as women leaders and affect the system. with regards to gender bias. So you can even see the very factual dinosaur at the top there, and then the pretty dinosaur with the bow in the pink one. When I was working in a school, my head of maths, when I showed her this picture, she nearly threw my phone across the room. She was so cross for the head of maths, and then even the doctor in training and the nurse in training in those pictures. And these are all quite modern pictures, so we're not talking about the 1970s. It's still happening, so start right, the school shoes, so, you know, very much an education, giggle for girls, bolt for boys, and then Marks and Spencer's even, with all the pink inner polka dots for the girls and the blue for the boys. And then your big sister will show you how to put on makeup and how to annoy the parents, and your big brother will play football, teach you how to play football and how to annoy the parents. And you can even see those little extra things that the photographer's done. He's put a dinosaur by the blue t-shirt and a nice purple swirly lollipop by the girls. So, you know, there's a lot of thought that goes into this marketing. We're in COVID, and unfortunately I've seen, and obviously I wouldn't shame anybody, but please try to be a bit more varied in schools. The pink masks and the blue masks were given out in schools, and then this very manly mask for men. As you can see, women couldn't possibly wear those because it's way too manly, and it's a non-medical grade and breathable, so, you know, why would women want those? Panels, we talk about that at all. I think that has improved of late, the man-only panels, which we call Mano, because they are getting called out. They're getting called out more. But I always use this one. It was recently, a couple of years ago, for inclusive education, and I just felt the irony of that. Is, you know, what these things look like. It's the image, isn't it? These are all the visuals that we are seeing all the time. And this is the bingo card that we often hear, and WomenEd hear it a lot, about female conference speakers, but also in other forums. Women are shy, women need to act more like men. No one's complained about this before. And we tried. One of them is both women we called were booked that weekend. We tried to book women and they didn't come. You know, so there's lots of excuses about why women can't be on panels. This one always shocks me. It's not in education, but it is 81,000 performance evaluations done by this research in 2018. And it always shocks me about the words. I think it was in the military it was done, but even so, you will recognise it. So you can see that men in their performance reviews are analytical and competent, dependable, versatile, level-headed and logical. There are some negatives, that they're called arrogant and irresponsible, but look at the list for women: inept, selfish, frivolous, passive, scattered, etc. And there's a few positives: compassionate, enthusiastic, energetic, organised. So even within performance management, which is theoretically this very unbiased view of 81,000, I just thought that was really shocking. But we've got the boss, and then we've got lady boss. Okay, so you're all lady bosses. And then this on Twitter, I thought was very interesting, that, you know, and we are not supposed to do this. And it's one of the things as disruptors we must call out if this happens in job interviews. Is my husband supportive? Have you got sufficient childcare? I have been in an interview where somebody did ask how they were going to sort the childcare out. And I stopped the interview and said it was, and I said, you cannot ask that question, and apologise. But the candidate did feel that she had to answer it, and, you know, and I said to her, you don't have to. And I love the end bit there with, you know, let me worry about the practicalities of whether I would whether I can turn up to school. I'll worry about that. You just decide if I'm good enough, you know, if I'm the person for your school. I'll sort the other stuff out. And this I thought was really interesting. So we had a man recently that surfed a massive wave and he got an award, and then a woman surfed a bigger wave, and then the competition was halted. because they couldn't quite believe it and they had to measure it. So I thought that was a lovely tweet from Sophie Walker there. And this one about how women are treated differently, and I do think particularly for Black women are treated very differently. And Novak Djokovic, excessive punishment from the US Open. Serena acted like a sore loser, the same author. So women are treated differently. They have have higher standards to uphold. Another one, I thought this is really interesting. So this academic, all the female academics were not titled, all the males were in Nick Triggle's academic in his article. And then here on BBC Question Time, Donna Kinnair, who actually, her full title is Professor Dame Donna Kinnair. Her name tag was missed out, but Professor Hugh Pennington wasn't. And that I've seen a lot, it happens. And finally, I just wanted to give these two. So Paul Kirchner talks about that it is conclusive. There is no difference between men and girls' brains, okay? No more than the difference between two men on a page standing next to each other, or two women. You know, there are brain differences, but nothing that will suggest gender. And this final one from Sandy Toksvig, I think is really interesting as well, about how we have ended up seeing everything through the male lens. So when I was a student at Cambridge, an anthropology professor holding up a picture of a bone with 28 incisions carved in it. This is often considered to be man's first attempt at a calendar, she explained. She paused as we dutifully wrote this down. My question to you is, what man needs to mark 28 days? So I think that's a really great finish for us to think about how the lens is often patriarchal, and how gendered cheese, right from toddlers, baby grows, affects us all. And pink and blue, as I said in the chapter for our book, it damages both genders, okay, for boys and for girls, for men and for women. Thank you. Going to bring everybody back now.
Thank you, Jules.
Hi, Jules.
Hello.
Hey, Jules.
It's my first virtual gendered cheese. Usually, last year we had a generation game. I had Kezia and Buki up trying to guess all the gendered cheese images.
Oh, it was fabulous, Jules. I've photoed I've taken an image of every single one. We're just going to keep tweeting them out one at a time. Fabulous.
I just tried to find a Twitter thing that somebody posted here in Jersey with a whole list of all these stars of lawyers, and every single one was a man. Every single one. It's like women are not lawyers.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Thanks for that, Jules. That was great.
Thank you. Wow, what an unconference.
Amazing. Quite amazing.
I'd just like to say a huge thank you to everyone that has taken part this weekend, whether you've been one of our amazing attendees or one of our brilliant participants. Some of us are joining from different time zones. I'm not sure if Lisa's slept this weekend, and Liz has obviously travelled a huge distance in between particular sessions. I just, it's been really lovely, and I have missed seeing everybody in person, but I know that I've been able to connect with more people this way. So thank you ever so much. You should have had an email at some point today with an evaluation. Please do feed back to us. We're always trying to improve. There's some things we can control and some things we can't control, but we'll do everything that we can within our control in order to get better for next time.
I just realised that my background, which is Penn's amazing drawing for this unconference, which has, if you see actually that way, the different aspects of our aims, our strategic aims, it's back to front. You can't read it.
You can, I can see it.
I'm seeing it. That's really weird.
You're seeing it in reverse.
Yeah, I'm seeing it in reverse. It's really strange.
I'll put a picture on Twitter for you so you can see it.
Okay, cool. The speakers today have been brilliant. Yeah, again, another excellent session. Inspirational. My fingers are hurting from tweeting. That's how much I've done.
Well, same here for me, Palm, definitely. Please do fill the Menti in, because traditionally after Gender Teas at one of our events, we ask everybody now to pledge. In what way are you going to be 10% braver? In that Menti, we can get all your responses and we'll show them on Twitter as they come through this afternoon. Please do fill that in while we're finishing off. And let's keep the conversation going on Twitter. You have got all of Sunday afternoon with nothing better to do whatsoever than just keep the conversation going about all of our key campaigns and about the community that is developing across WomenEd. And that's, I think, what I've taken from our global reach this time. The spread and the depth and the reach of the community in WomenEd is quite glorious. Thank you all for joining in. Liz, you're back with us. What do you want to say?
Well, my brain has like gone to mush. I've been sat here messaging back and forth. Just every session, there's so many gems in there. So I'd absolutely echo is continue that conversation. And I think the biggest call out was to connect and build your own network, and so you can take ownership of your own path. And I think this is a really good opportunity to do that. So people who you've chatted with in the what's it called? Chat thread? I don't know what it's called, or people that I have no idea. I can barely speak at this point. But anyway, and also anyone who's run a session that you wanted to explore more, because I know in almost every session, in every session that I've gone to, I thought actually I'd like to know more about that. I'd like to talk more about this. So use this really as a springboard to continue those conversations, like Vivian mentioned. And yeah, I miss everyone. You know, I'm really pleased to see everybody. So a great big kind of virtual hug.
And Lisa, who must be shattered, what would you like to add?
Oh, I am going back to bed. It's 6 a.m. almost here. So this is the very first conference, virtual or in real life, where there was such deep diversity. I'm trying to remember, I go to a massive international conference in Banff almost every year, and I don't recall seeing such a wide range of race, culture. I don't, and I'm just sitting here in awe because it is a campaign of WomenEd, but we've had to be deliberate and we haven't shied away from that, and I think that's what we have to do. We need Black speakers, we need Asian speakers, we need brown speakers, we need gay speakers, we need disabled speakers. We've done that. Everyone needs a seat at the bloody table.
Build a bigger table. Kezia, are you going to finish us off?
That sounds as if I'm going to do something.
I think your panel title of "Why Are We Still Protesting This Shit" has got to be the line we take away, hasn't it?
And I think that was taken from a picture I saw on social media a little while ago, with a lady that was clearly in her 80s or 90s with the same sort of the sign, and she was dressed as a suffragette. And I just thought, I can't be doing this when I'm that age. My daughter can't be doing this when she's that age. We've got to do something different, and we need to speed this up. An awful lot of the evidence that's been shared over the weekend shows that it's standing still, and in some places it's getting worse. And only people like ourselves, people that are watching this, people that are engaging, we have to be the people to do something, because it's not going to happen for us. No one else has got a vested interest in it, and we've got to go out and we've got to do something, and it's got to change, because there are too many people very, very happy with the status quo, and you know, we've all just got to be a bit more active, and we've got to do things rather than just moan and whinge about it. I get very grumpy with people that moan and whinge about things, though I do a lot of that. Figure out what it is that's got to change, and then let's go and change it. And conferences like this, I think, and conferences have allowed us to talk to people that are sharing similar views, but we now have an individual responsibility to go and get stuff done, and things that will change things for ourselves and the generation coming through and the generation after that, because we are still protesting this shit and it is not okay. I've just seen Natasha, she's managed to pop herself on. Is there any, you know, I don't want to be the last voice, I never like to be the last voice. Natasha, is there anything that you would like to add before we all say goodbye?
No, I think it's just echoing, you know, everything that's really been said, actually, and it's just about us making sure that, I suppose, it's just a call to action now. You know, we've had enough of having the same conversations over and over again. What are we going to do to take this forward? And I think that, you know, us as a group and having this unconference in itself is actually what's pushing things forward, and we just need to keep plugging that, keep supporting each other, yeah, and let's get moving. It's really, really positive. Sorry I wasn't there. I'm actually working today.
No apologies. No apologies.
No apologies.
Anything else anyone would like to say?
Just thank you to everyone who's been with us this weekend. It's just been fabulous. Really has.
Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to all the chatters in the chat and the audience. And we will, of course, save the chat. We've got the videos. We will ask each speaker for if they wouldn't mind sharing their slides. Please appreciate putting the slides together, putting the chat together, and the videos will take us a little bit of time. There are other videos on our YouTube channel, so go and watch those while we wait and put all of this back together again for you, and we'll email it out to everybody.
We say thank you. Oh, thank you to Lift Lessons as well. I was going to say, who sponsored us for the weekend. Couldn't do it without
them. Thanks to Lift Lessons.
Any more thank yous?
Vivian and Kezia, who have done, particularly through the background, have been doing ridiculousness. We managed to get everybody online at the right time, which was because of your goddess organisational skills, which were not
more by accident than anything else. And I just want to thank
apologising
for reading everything.
It was brilliant, but I mean that showed just the amount of work to get that organised so that everyone knew what they had to do, and they managed the multiple Eventbrite logins and actually got in, and it worked, and we vaguely stuck to time. So I think brilliant, and thank you to all the work that you do all of the time behind the scenes that no one else sees.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'd echo that.
Thank you ever so much, everybody. Right, I'm going to go now, partly because I've got to go and buy some new makeup because the bags under my eyes are now bigger. So I'm going to go off and do that. So thank you ever so much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.